Welcome to the 534th Board Meeting of the California Regional Water Quality Control Board, Central Valley Region. I'd like to introduce the board members at this time. On my far left is Carmen Ramirez. Sitting next to Carmen, and between Carmen and myself is John Constantino of Grass Valley, and I have to point out that Carmen comes from Atwater. And on my right is Sandra Meraz of Alpaugh. My name is Carl Longley of Fresno. Member Schneider will be joining us after lunch, and Tam Dudek may be joining us in the audience today. Tam, are you here? I expect she'll be joining us later. And I need to announce that the board meeting is being webcast to the public. Please note that we reorganize the items on this agenda so that action items are heard later in the day when more board members are present, and copies of the revised agenda are available in the lobby. John, could you lead us in the pledge, please?
You stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, John. I'll now introduce the Executive Officer, Pamela Creedon, who will introduce her staff.
Thank you, Dr. Longley, and members of the board, good morning. Across the room from me, to my left, is Andrew Altovogt. He's the Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento office, and next to Andrew is Patrick Palupa, Senior Staff Counsel for the board. To my far left is Karen Lanfranchi-Rizzardi, Executive Assistant for the board and for me. And next to Karen is Ken Landau, Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento office, and his last board meeting with the board before his retirement, which I'm not going to say anything more because I'll cry. And right next to me is David Koop, Senior Staff Counsel for the board. And to my immediate right is our newest Staff Counsel, Andrew Dieringer. And in the audience we have Clint Snyder, Assistant Executive Officer with the Reading office, and Clay Rogers, Assistant Executive Officer in the Fresno office, and Linda Bracamani, Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento office, and the retiree / on vacation, former Assistant Executive Officer Richard Lankarovich.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, and Adam Lapitz. Gosh. To replace Ken, our newest AEO in the Sacramento office, Adam Lapitz. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In order to conduct our regional board meetings in a fair and efficient manner, we will be proceeding in accordance with the meeting procedures that have been provided with a summary agenda and are available here at the staff table and upon request, and are posted on the board's website and are summarized on the computer screens during breaks. Any questions or comments regarding these procedures may be directed to Karen Lanfranchi-Rizzardi, the Administrative Assistant. Are there any board member communications? I'll be reporting on my activities tomorrow morning. Other than WQCC, which both John and I attended last week, I have some other activities to report on. Yes, John?
I was just going to report the WQCC.
Yes, Carmen? Very good. While we're in board member communications, Pamela, could you explain the position that SOPI is now fulfilling and the role and board member responsibility?
Certainly. And I just call it the Stewardship Council, and there's another full name to it, and I don't know all the name, but it was through a lawsuit with PG&E that they settled with. They created the Stewardship Council. They set aside some land to be put into conservation, and a member of this board has always been a representative in on those activities. Previously, Bob Schneider served on that. When Soapy was in the board, she served in that role. Soapy has a unique experience in real estate and especially in establishing land easements for conservation. Essentially serves as the executive director of a conservation group in the valley. The Sequoia River.
The Sequoia Lands.
Sequoia Lands.
Riverland Trust, I believe.
Riverland Trust. And so she's been acting on behalf of the board, even as the board can appoint her to represent them, and they have. And the stewardship council is winding down, but her role on it continues to be valuable because of her past knowledge and her experience. And so they're still active for the following year, and every year she has to be reappointed by the board to serve as their representative. She sent me a note to remind her. I can't believe it's already been a year, but she came and spoke to the board a year ago when we were in Stockton. She's offering to do another update to the board, and she would like to remain serving to represent the board this following year. So-
It's an area in which she works naturally, so she's quite familiar with the activities there. As you pointed out, Bob Schneider has served in that role previously. Bob is, in the past at least, I can't speak for him today, but in the past he's been very satisfied with what SOPI's doing, and he has great insight into their activities also. So,
We didn't put it on as an agenda item. We need to get back to them that the board will entertain it, and I think at the next board meeting we can have an item where you would just make a decision.
right, so that's for your information. I personally am real comfortable with SOPI serving in that role. But any discussion? Yes, John.
No, I'm fine with that as well, but if Sophie wants to come and do a presentation,
Right.
I'd welcome that.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily have to be the next meeting either. I mean, whenever it fits into the calendar.
Exactly.
I think she expects to, and she should. She's been giving a presentation every year.
We have to send a letter saying that the board took action, so it will have to be done next meeting, but she can come whichever is appropriate for her, but she should update the board on the activities.
Thank you. That takes us to public forum. Yes. Thank you. I have a card from, excuse me, I hope I get the name right, Susanna Womack. Is that correct? Yeah. Sure, certainly. And we need to make sure that that it's on. There you go.
So it's on? Yeah.
Yes, go
Great.
ahead.
Okay. My name is Suzanne Womack. I'm a third grade teacher. I've taken time off. It's costing me money today to be here to represent my family farm. Unfortunately, my family farm my farm is from the 1880s. We've owned it since the 1960s. And in the late 60s, early 70s, as you know, the State Water Project condemned our land and put in Clifton Court forebay. Our land is this green area here. It's surrounded by the forebay on this side and Old River and then the Delta Mendota Canal. Now, of course, the Delta Mendota is the federal project. We're between these two places. They suck in here, they suck in here. We have water sucked all the time. Our farm, our license gives us 6.25 cubic feet per second of water. The state water and the federal waters projects take 15,000 cubic feet per second. Now, to people, I know most of you know what that means, but if you don't know, that's 9.6 billion gallons of water a day. The river reverses its natural flow. Everything is mucked up. Our banks have been eroded. We have dirt in our ditches. We have horrible water quality. In addition, when they put in the forebay, my dad's in his 80s now. My dad asked that they put a wall so that the water wouldn't seep through because they were building on a sandbar. They didn't listen to my father. We have seepage here. Now, according to our condemnation, papers, the state paid to put in drainage tile, and they also provided an access right here for us to discharge into the forebay. We're one of the few, we're the only place on the forebay that does that. I believe we're the only farm that has this much adverse problems caused by the State Water Project and the federal water project. Our farm operation is the same as it was in the 1880s. We grow alfalfa. We've, pretty much done that in simple row crops. We don't do anything much. Now, we're being asked to look at our water quality. We're being asked to join the San Joaquin. We had to join it, San Joaquin Water Quality. We joined under protest because we were told we'd be fined $1,000 a day. But basically, our water quality is awful. Everything we get is affected by the state and the federal. That's why I'm here today. I think we should have an exemption. I know we don't give exemptions, but my goodness, you've put us right in the middle of this. And the second request is that I talked with Carl Torgeson of the DWR. I don't know if Carl's here or not, but I've asked Carl to, have DWR handle our things since we're such a limited, we're a small. This is David and Goliath. We're a small little farm, and we're being asked basically to check our water quality, but our water quality is just hugely impacted by this. So I asked Carl Torgeson to help us out, and he said, "Well, we can't do that. We comply with the regulations of the SWRCB." So my first request is that we be exempted. My second request is I would like all the public paperwork that DWR has done since the thing opened, where they're testing their water quality. So we know what we're getting. We have no idea what we're getting. We're a small farm. We can't afford lawyers. We can't afford, we're paying $3,000 a year. It's not a lot to big corporations. It's a lot to our family farm, in addition to all the problems we've had. I know I'm a little over. I apologize, but this is where I am. So this is why I'm here today.
Well, some of your issues sound to me like they may be water rights issues, but what I would appreciate it is if staff could meet with Ms. Womack and her family, and
They've already come out to our ranch.
but have our people met with you?
Your people came out to our ranch. I have a letter. I have various letters. Came out to the ranch, and they gave us an exemption, but then they said, well, things are changing, and then suddenly we're not exempted anymore. Because they said it was because of the what goes into the the below ground reservoirs. Even though we don't pump from the ground, all we get is seepage from the forebay that we have to keep putting back in. So we have a unique problem here. We've had people come out. I keep working. I go to every meeting I can go to because it's a huge problem. I may not have them, but I probably
Okay.
have most of my letters.
I'd like
Yeah.
let's see if our executive officer has.
Well, Joe is aware of this situation, and he's right here if you'd like Joe to
Okay.
speak to it.
Joe, do you want to address us on the issue?
Good morning, Dr. Longley, members of the board. Joe Karkoski, I'm the head of our Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. So staff in 2013 went out and did an inspection. So this was before we had the new orders in place. So that was based on the conditional waiver. We had been asked to go out there and look at their property to see if they needed coverage under the conditional waiver. And so the staff conclusion at the time was no. But kind of gave a heads up that we were working on these new regulations. And so Ms. Womack's family received a letter, sort of the standard outreach letter that we send out about the need to get regulatory coverage for irrigated lands. Staff had further conversations. We sent a letter to them, and this was still before the coalition deadline, the deadline to sign up. So it wasn't a formal directive at the time, but just kind of giving a heads up. So we did have that communication. The board didn't create any exemptions for irrigated cropland. I mean, the only possibility of having any sort of exemption is if one could demonstrate that there is no discharge of waste that could affect the quality of either groundwater or surface water. So it sounds like they've done the right thing. They've gotten the regulatory coverage. So they have the same obligations as any other member of a coalition. There'll be the farm evaluation where they'll have to do that reporting and nitrogen management plan and that sort of thing. So there aren't any extra requirements. There are no water quality monitoring requirements that is imposed on this particular farming operation.
I guess I'm particularly interested if their unique location creates any issues from them that make them different than other folks that we deal with.
Well, it certainly does, and I think if we were to get to the point where we identified a water quality issue associated with their parcel, then some of those factors that she's mentioned would certainly have to be taken into consideration. But we have other situations where you could have not this exact kind of situation, but where a grower might be applying water that's, say, higher in salt, like above the objective, and then they discharge above the objective because that's what their supply water is. So we may run into those situations in other circumstances. But right now, the main outreach wasn't to follow up on any identified water quality problem. It's just sort of that first step of making sure they get regulatory coverage. And I think the expectation on them would be the same as we expect of others: is implement management practices to achieve that sort of best practicable treatment or control. Kind of do your best to protect water quality.
Well, they obviously feel that they have a particular dilemma there, and appreciate it if you could follow up with them to better define that for us. And just a question I have, Ms. Womack, just for curiosity's sake, how much land are you farming there, and what are you cropping it with?
Mainly alfalfa. We should have 575 acres. We have a lot more because we own to the middle of the river, and we own an island that's been taken away. But anyway, a lot of our land, speaking of salt, is starting to not be farmable. We're looking at having to put in new tiling. The amount of sediment, because this whole thing is so funny. To prevent sediment. Well, heck, we get so much sediment. Our ditches, when they came out, they said, wow.
That's the kind of thing that I would like staff to define and get back to us on.
They came out and they saw it and they said, wow, why haven't you talked to us?
I think we probably need a follow-up, so. John, did you have a...
Yeah, I was just going to say, what I'm hearing from both Ms. Womack and Joe is that this is so far sort of gone through the regular motions of the regulatory program, which is all proper and correct, but it does, as Carl said, it does sound like there's unique situations here, and I would again agree that staff should look at those unique situations and have a detailed discussion. At the end of the day, you may be regulated just like everybody else, but then again, with a unique discharge and a unique inflows, maybe not. So that's we thank you for coming, but it's
I understand.
We have to get staff to look at it. We can't make an action right now.
And I would appreciate one other thing. We're in Contra Costa County. They also say we're part of the Delta, like we have peatland. We don't. So we're with an association of growers that are, the Delta's mainly peatland through there. We're not. So I don't know if there isn't anybody in Contra Costa County with this kind of stuff going. I don't know.
I don't think there's many people between two projects like you are. So we would appreciate that.
That's why I brought this, because you just don't see it until you see it. But thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
And who will be getting back to us?
Mr. Karkowski is the lead on this, and he may send one of his staff out or whatever, but we'll be getting back a report and describing your situation maybe if something else is different, or as John
Well,
pointed out,
yeah.
you may be regulated like everybody else, but we need more information from staff, so.
Okay, I
and-
appreciate
and
that.
something a little more quantitative also.
But, they have been out before.
Yeah, but at that point in time, this situation wasn't where it is now.
Okay.
Insofar as the program and so forth.
Well, I
So,
really appreciate it. Thank
you.
you so much.
thank you.
So, Dr. Long, I would like to point out, we do take into consideration conditions, naturally occurring conditions and salts similar like to the west side growers, where we have a high salt and a high groundwater level. And staff does take that into consideration all the time. But there are other constituents, not just salts, nitrates and pesticides and stuff. So
And
staff
just-
will do a thorough review and to work with you on it, but
And Ms. Womack's talking about sediments that are actually
well, exactly.
deposited on them. And I'm interested in, she's talking about seepage out of that project and how it impacts their
Yeah, we've
their
re-rocked.
farmland, and
Yeah.
I'm interested in that.
We've had to re-rock 3 times. We no longer have a reclamation
Right.
district because they took our reclamation district. We're the only people in it. We don't have it. So we've re-rocked 3 times. After the 3rd time, when we got a bill for $5,000 from the state for engineering 2 years later, the state knows what's going on. They just keep
Yeah.
ignoring. They're the Goliath and we're little David, and we just keep fighting. We're farmers. So I appreciate your time. And can I get the state, since Carl Torgerson says that they keep up, I'd like all the state things, because I'd like to know what they are finding, because he says they're monitoring.
Yeah, that's over in Department of Water
Yeah.
Resources, and I don't
Well,
know
but
what
they have to, he said they have to comply with you, so they'd have to be with you, is what he says in his letter. Can I give you his
That's a
letter?
question that Joe will be able to answer for you down the road.
Okay, I appreciate it, because I have his letter
Right.
saying that, and I really want that information. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak to the board on matters that are not on the day's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to the executive officer's report, which is a normal, we've grown to respect and
So,
read and find out all the great things that are going on.
Okay, so Dr. Longley, I do have some staff presentations. That'll be all done tomorrow.
Okay.
So, but you do have a presentation for the esteemed Richard Lankarvish.
Is Richard with us today?
He's been with us a long time, Dr. Longley. He is present at the meeting.
He's present at the meeting.
He's alive and well here today.
I'm glad to hear that Richard is alive and well.
He's back from a long visit to Alaska.
Oh my gosh. He brought some fish.
Where's the resolution?
That sounds fishy to me. I'm sorry. Okay. I have to read this, but before I read it, I would appreciate it very much if Richard could come up here. And probably the best thing is for me to read this is to go over to the podium and read it. Thank you, Richard. You've done that enough times in one of your last duties. This is a resolution commending Richard C. Lankarovich for his 14 years of service with the California Regional Water Quality Control Board, Central Valley Region. Whereas Richard has worked for a number of state agencies, including the Department of Food and Agriculture and the State Water Resources Control Board. And whereas Richard joined the Central Valley Board on March 2nd, 2000, very memorable day in our existence, as a staff service manager too in the Sacramento office. And whereas since 2001, Richard has been an assistant executive officer in charge of region-wide budgeting and personnel issues and supervising the Rancho Cordova administrative staff and answering the chair's inane questions from time to time. And whereas Richard actually liked budgeting and accounting, which I found quite admirable, making him invaluable to the rest of the managers who hate that stuff. And whereas even though the rest of the managers hated budgeting and accounting, being engineers, Richard still made them manage their programs in a fiscally responsible way. And whereas Richard has successfully guided Region 5 through many expansion, contractions, and budget crises, made sure we could pay our bills, and made sure the executive officer was not fired for mismanagement of funds. And whereas because of Richard's vast experience in accounting and budgeting, he was assigned as lead for developing anaerobic digesters in the Central Valley to combat greenhouse gases, an assignment that probably made sense to someone, even if not to Richard. But it made good sense to me, and it certainly made good sense to the executive officer. And whereas Richard has coordinated statewide coordination of discretionary contract funds for several years, successfully bringing diverse interests of the board into agreement on a set of priorities for funding. He thought they brought it into agreement. And more, and whereas if we have any questions after his retirement, Richard assures us that he left his cell phone in Alaska and he's going on to Germany to visit his brother. And whereas Richard has proven himself to be knowledgeable, thoughtful, compassionate, reasonable, an excellent manager, a good communicator, and a good friend, and whereas Richard will be sorely missed by the board, executive officer, assistant executive officers, management staff, and certainly at least this board member, and I'm sure others. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the Regional Water Quality Control Board and the staff respectfully extend to Richard on the occasion of his retirement our sincere thanks and appreciation for a job well done, and be it further resolved that this regional board and staff wish Richard and his family only happiness and fulfillment of their plans in his retirement years. This is unanimously adopted this 9th day of October 2014 at the 534th regular meeting of the California Regional Water Quality Control Board, Central Valley Region. And unless I hear otherwise, this is unanimous. With that said, I want to present this plaque to you, Richard, and thank you very much for your service. So, Richard, it's now yours.
Oh, that's scary. I would like to just say thanks to the board for your service. It's been a pleasure serving this board, these members, as well as several before. And the work that you do is appreciated, and I know that you get well compensated for it. So we, on behalf of myself and the staff, we always appreciate your effort here. And I would like to again thank the staff that I worked with over the years here. They're a great group of employees. You have a wonderful staff that do support you. And you may not feel it all the time, but they do support you, and they do understand that that's their job, and they do a good job of it. And I've enjoyed working with them, and it's been a pleasure. And I will go out knowing that the board's left in good hands and that they will continue. So thank you, everyone.
And we're going to take about 3 or 4 minutes now for pictures. If the board would join me here, and Pamela, if you would join us. We're going to be a little different on this one.
Make them leave the desk.
Thank you very much, Richard, again, and we'll now proceed with the executive officer's report.
Dr. Longley, the rest will be tomorrow. And unless there's any, are there any questions about the report? from any
Certainly.
of the board
Is there
members?
anything? Well, and that gives us the opportunity, if you'd like to bring something up at this point to the executive officer that she can address in full detail tomorrow, that'd be the time to do it.
Okay, so I'll wait. There's some items I'd like to point out to Member Schneider, but I'll wait till tomorrow when he's here with us, so.
Okay, sounds good. With that, we'll go to, let me see where we are on the agenda since we rearranged it. We now go to the 2015 board meeting calendar, right? And are there any dates on the calendar that are of issue to anybody? Pardon? No. Are there any issues on the calendar? Yes, Ken? You sent out an email to us asking us to respond.
I have not received any comments back that there's a problem.
My only problem is Ken's not going to be here.
Then we'll just cancel the meetings.
One thing that I didn't have a chance to check on, there are some meetings. Let me get back to you tomorrow and remind me.
Okay, bring this issue up again tomorrow,
I appreciate it, yeah.
okay?
And Bob will be here too, so we can see if he has any issues.
Yeah, the only thing unusual about this is that we are actually, this board used to have regular board meetings in locations other than Rancho Cordova. And that got cut out many years ago because it frankly costs us more money to hold meetings elsewhere in terms of travel. But we are proposing for the the April meeting to be in Fresno and October meeting in Reading. So,
And that's appropriate. We brought it up at the WQCC again, but we do need the money so that we can have two-way communications with those sites, and maybe someday we can find a way to get those funds freed up so that we can have more interaction with those sites.
okay, so we'll bring this up again tomorrow morning then.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you. That takes us to item 22 on the agenda. At this time, we'll hear a status report on the cleanup of the Aerojet Rocketdyne facility here in Rancho Cordova. This is an information item only and no action will be taken, although the board may ask questions regarding the presentations. Following the presentation, interested parties will be allowed 3 minutes each to address the board. We'll now begin with the presentation.
Good morning, Dr. Longley, members of the board. I'm Alex McDonald. I'm the senior engineer here in the office, and I've been requested to provide you guys an update on Aerojet. I'm looking back in my records, and I see the last time I did this was in 2006, so hopefully, and we have mostly new board members here, I think, except for yourself, and Bob Schneider, I think, was the chair at the time. So hopefully you guys will find this interesting. I've been working on this project, almost finishing my 20th year on this project, so if you have any questions, feel free to stop me at any time. If I'm talking too fast, which I have a tendency to do, raise your hand or something. Ken might throw something at me, but please slow me down if I'm going too fast.
Right, and Alex, it may be in your presentation, but you mentioned you have 20 years on this project. It was an old project when you took it over.
Well, if you look at board history on this project, we've been working on the project for 63 years, almost.
63 years.
Right. So I've been on a third of the time, essentially.
So I think Alex's presentation will point out why it's an ongoing project and why it hasn't gone away. And the horrible thing is, little less than 40 years from now, some board members will be hearing about the centennial of the project.
Correct, probably.
Thank you.
So-
Go ahead.
One of the things that's changed since 2006, I now need glasses, so we'll see how that goes. Okay, let's just go back a sign here. So, where is Aerojet? First thing, give you a few little background things on logistics. Where is Aerojet? If you travel down US 50, 17 miles from downtown Sacramento, eastbound, you'll see Aerojet on the right-hand side of the road, just past the Hazel Avenue Aerojet Road exits. 8,800 acres sitting out there. Get a little bit more specific on where it is. Aerojet, 8,800 acres you see there. It also includes areas to the east. If you look at out here, we have Area 39, Area 40, Area 41. Properties that have been owned by Aerojet was Area 40. Area 39 is the State Off-Road Vehicle Park. Aerojet used that for some disposal activities and a little bit of testing. And then Area 41, which is now also known as Cabot Ranch, currently owned by Tykert. Aerojet used that as a disposal area. Also within the vicinity of Aerojet, you have the White Rock Road dump. This is one of 4 dumps in the area, all named White Rock Road. This is the third of 4 of them, currently owned by Aerojet. The inactive Rancho Cordova test site. This is a piece of property that had similar activities that Aerojet had, owned by Aerojet currently, also owned by McDonnell Douglas during a period of time, bought back by Aerojet in the mid-1980s. Also in the vicinity, we have the Mather Air Force Base, another Superfund site. Close to our office, you see our office, that's where we're sitting right now. We all have Purity Oil Sales. It's a small site overseen by DTSC. It's being cleaned up as we speak, a little bit of groundwater contamination. So, why did Aerojet come out to Rancho Cordova? One thing before I leave this slide, if you notice there's all this brown area in here, that means it's been mined hydraulically. There is a floating dredge that actually mined for gold over probably, gosh, it's got to be 20 square miles sitting out here. So, given that in context, Aerojet comes out here. Why do they come out here? They want to do rocket testing, rocket manufacturing. So on this slide, you'll see we have 5 pictures. Early Aerojet area, probably in the early 1950s. Basically, you see a rocket test going on here. Obviously, health and safety wasn't that big of a concern. This gentleman's not too far away. The rocket's firing, to the ground here. There's no safety measures you see, as opposed to a newer solid rocket testing you see on the far right of the figure. You see two tests going on over here. The rocket motor strapped down. You see no one in sight. Here is a Minuteman rocket. So these are filled with solid rocket propellant. Once you light them, they go to completion. You can't stop them. Then on the bottom of the slide here, we have liquid rocket testing. Here's basically the first deflector plate built at the Aerojet site. They're doing a water test. They basically you'd mount the liquid rocket motor up here on the top. You'd have a deflector plate where you'd put out 3,000 gallons a minute of water to quench the exhaust coming off. That water would be collected at the bottom in a sump and then disposed of. Disposed of in this case is to ground. And then in the middle side, we have a more modern test that's going to be going on. This is the liquid rocket motor. All you see is the engine sitting here. Off to the side, you'd have the propellant in tanks. So they came out here to do the testing. That area you saw that was hydraulically mined, $20 an acre. So they purchased 20,000 acres at $20 an acre. Cheap land, good to work with. So if you go to the next slide here, this is the dredge I was talking about. It floats on a lake. The lake moves around as they mine. There's an arm that swings out. And so if you look over here, in the bottom part of the slide, you see these rows. Basically, that's the arm swinging back and forth, depositing all the cobbles. So you see rows and rows and rows of cobble piles just of rock. So it's a good place to, you can't hurt the soil. It's a good place where you can pile the rock up. If you look over here, you see two of Aerojet sites. They have a revetment built around them of this rock. Just in case something blows up, the next site is protected. So it's really a good place to put rocket motors, test rocket motors, but to actually place waste on the ground, it's not very good. Cobbles are very porous. Anything you put on the ground seeps directly into groundwater. So good for testing, bad for the environment as far as pollution goes. So here's, again, in this slide, I'm going to give the first 37 years of Aerojet in one slide. As I said, we've been looking at the site since 1952. We issued Resolution 52-127 back then, basically describing waste discharge requirements for Aerojet. Waste discharge requirements for Aerojet at the time, don't pollute. It was a page and a half long, listed 8 chemicals on the back, on the second page, to say, do not find these chemicals in surface water or groundwater. That's all it said. So basically, we told Aerojet, go out and do your operations. And probably at the time, we probably had an office of 5 or 6 people. So that covered the whole Central Valley. So inspections of this facility probably were non-existent most of the time. So Aerojet went about doing its thing. So over the next 50 years here, we've issued over 60 orders on Aerojet. A lot of them are waste discharge requirements, let them do their operations, discharges to landfills. They have numerous boilers, air strippers, you name it. They have discharges. We have permits for those things. They have deep injection wells they had deep injection wells to get rid of their hazardous waste. So that was primarily the orders that we were issuing. However, in the middle of the 1970s, we actually had an inspector go out there to see if they had compliance with their waste discharge requirements. Lo and behold, the hazardous waste that was being discharged below ground into these deep injection wells that go down to about 1,000 feet, they're being discharged to a surface pond. The wells were not accepting the waste at the time, and Aerojet needed to get rid of their wastes that were being generated. So what they do is they placed it into these ponds. Basically, that started the investigation of Aerojet, 1975. We issued claim abatement orders, we issued cease and desist orders, we issued referrals to the Attorney General. So that period from 75 to like 1980, 1981, bantering back in the Aerojet trying to get them to do things. 81 comes along, and what comes out? EPA says, Aerojet, you should be on our first Superfund list that came out in 1982. With that, we have basically, now we have another gorilla in the room, essentially, to force Aerojet to do what we need them to do. Aerojet actually, during that period of time, right before they became on the Superfund list, they knew that the groundwater was an issue. And so what they did, they built actually 4 or 5 groundwater extraction treatment systems starting in 81 and built them to help contain the flow going off their property. Nothing off property, only to stop the waste at their property boundaries. In fact, a former EO of this office, Gary Carlton, was one who designed the original groundwater extraction treatment systems on Aerojet. So basically, since that was issued in 1983, it took, when they added to the Superfund list, it took 6 years to develop the first partial consent decree. And this consent decree is partial. What it does is it deals with taking the Aerojet site, saying you must do an investigation of the site and a feasibility on how you're going to clean it up. And it basically then had other parts to it, you know, reimbursement of our fees, past costs, future costs, lost water supplies, sampling of water supply wells, and basically grandfathered in those 4 groundwater extraction treatment systems and had set operating parameters for them. So that's what we were operating under beginning in 1989. We had a partial consent decree, covered 330 plus sites on Aerojet. If you remember, below the Aerojet site was called the inactive Rancho Cordova test site, similar operations to what Aerojet did. Down there, all they did was essentially test rocket motors. I mean, that's essentially, they're all designed to test rocket motors and did some disposal on the property. So it's like a miniature Aerojet, but much smaller in scale. Plus, one thing that Aerojet had on its property were 2 chemical plants that produced primarily pesticides and herbicides that this facility did not. As I said, owned and operated by Aerojet and/or McDonnell Douglas over various portions of time. There's soil and groundwater contamination on that property, and it's under an imminent and substantial endangerment order issued by DTSC in 1994. What are the contaminants of concern? Primarily, there's 4 classes that we're really looking at. First is solvents. So in here, I've abbreviated them: trichloroethylene, TCE, perchloroethylene, or PCE, freon, and chloroform. Those are the 4 main solvents that Aerojet used. If you look at why they need all this solvent, they needed things to be clean. If they didn't have things clean, they're testing a rocket motor, it can blow up. So basically, they would sometimes take a whole rocket motor, like a liquid rocket engine, dip it in a vat of TCE, in other words, bring it out, and then wash it off, and that water would all go to ground. Or if they were removing a solid rocket propellant, they would clean out the solid rocket propellant and have TCE around it so we don't have explosions. And they had a lot of water with it. So then they clean out that rocket motor so they could use it again. So everything had to be very clean. Primary solvent they used was TCE. And we're looking at levels of concern in water at the parts per billion range. And these things are concerned because they can cause cancer. That's the main gist of why those are a concern. Perchlorate, solid rocket propellant. So we have liquid rockets, solid rockets. Most solid rockets, main component of the fuel is perchlorate, ammonium perchlorate. Its level of concern is also very similar to TCE. It's in the same range. It's 4 to 8 parts per billion is the level of concern. The drinking water standard is 6. It's not a cancer causer. It was actually used as a thyroid suppressor. If you had hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism, to bring your level down, they would give you doses of perchlorate at much, much higher concentrations than we are regulating it now. So it was always thought to be not a big deal. But later on, as I'll show you in a few slides later on, it turns into a bigger deal than it was back originally. NDMA short for N-nitrosodimethylamine. It's a component of liquid rocket fuel. It's in the, when you have, there's several classes of rocket fuel we'll get to, liquid ones. One is hydrazine-based, and one is kerosene type. So the hydrazine-based, when you make hydrazine, you have NDMA in it. And also when you burn hydrazine, you can form NDMA. And it's not a level, its level of concern is not parts per billion, it's parts per trillion. So we're 3 orders of magnitude lower when we're concerned with NDMA. And this is not just a suspected carcinogen, it is a known carcinogen. It's in some, if you're actually doing studies in school, this is what they give you to the rats to show, hey, we're going to get cancer, you can study the rats now. So it is a level of concern is that parts per billion range. And then we have fuels, primarily hydrogen-based and kerosene. Those are pretty standard. And where are these sources of contamination? I said there's 330 plus ones on Aerojet. You can group them up into these general areas you see here on the slide. As you see here, we have in the middle of the property here, we have things called lines. Basically, every line is a rocket motor from a solid rocket motor. So what you want to do with a rocket motor, you need the motor itself, you need the propellant. So what the Aerojet would do is take the propellant, you have to grind the propellant up, mix it with binders and other things, cast and cure it in the rocket motor, then you have to trim it, and then you take it over to the far side of the Aerojet on the east, and that's where you test it. So you basically, from the empty shell through the complete rocket, goes on in one line. And after that rocket motor is no longer needed, they would build some other new rocket motor there. So they'd build a line for every rocket motor. At those places, you would see these mix stations. You see, and this is where they use a lot of TCE to clean the parts off. A lot of TCE, a lot of perchlorate went to ground because they wanted to keep things away from your processes. They don't want things to explode. So everything went to ground and seeped into the groundwater. We have 2 chemical plants, I said before. They have large impoundments where all their wastewater went. They made primarily, I said, pesticides, herbicides. One of them was Prowl, a very good herbicide used extensively around the country for a while. Currently is no longer in use. One thing here, you see hog out. This is where we have the highest concentration of perchlorate on the site. This is where they would called hogging out a rocket motor. You have a rocket motor where it's been fired, you have some residual propellant within it, or it's a rocket motor that's been sitting there for a while and perchlorate has a shelf life. They have to remove that propellant out. They use a water knife to basically clean all the propellant out, lots of water. That all goes to a ground or a pit, and then they scoop that propellant out and they haul it away for disposal. So on the far east side of the property, you see where you have rocket testing. This is where we had liquid rocket testing and solid rocket testing. We have a landfill, which basically took inert waste, but it also happened to take the cardboard boxes that perchlorate came in. They crushed them, threw them into that landfill. So throughout that landfill, you have really low concentrations of perchlorate that have actually migrated to groundwater. Open burn area, where you take waste propellant and TCE, pile it up on the ground, and you burn it after a period of time. So those are the main types of activities Aerojet was doing that's causing problems. As you see on the far side, down south, fewer facilities. These are remote, just in case one blows up. Beta Complex was testing liquid oxygen rockets. So liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen, mix them together, they combust. So really we don't have very little bit of contamination at all associated with liquid rocket propellant. However, on the far east part this is where we used perchlorate. We find perchlorate, hog out facility sitting out here. Get F spray field. This is a rather interesting one. This is where when the Aerojet built those 4 treatment systems originally. Well, one of the ways to get rid of TCE is air stripping. So they decided what we'll do is we'll spray the water up into the air. TCE likes to be in air instead of water. So it volatilizes, the water falls back to the ground, and we're done. Well, that was good and fine, and perchlorate wasn't a problem, but actually there's 8,000 ppb of perchlorate in that water. It doesn't volatilize. It's a salt. So it basically went to the ground. Now there's a plume of perchlorate emanating from that former, that Geddes spray field. They discontinued that after a few years for various reasons, and one of them was perchlorate. Next slide. Another thing you need to know, groundwater. If you look on Aerojet here, you see these arrows. This is groundwater flow direction. Groundwater flows in every direction but east. So as you move across the property, you see the arrows start eventually going to west, southwest. Groundwater on the far east side of the property is at 10 feet 12 feet below ground surface. It's at 100 feet or more on the far west side of the project. So as you move across the project, groundwater is moving in different directions. So we have plumes emanating from aerojet in each one of those directions of the arrows. So there's many different plumes associated with those source areas. Now, if I take a slice through aerojet, take a vertical slice down through aerojet from east to west, what you see here is a cartoon, essentially, of where we have aquifers, which consist of coarse grain materials, mostly sands and gravels, and then we have fine silts and clays in between. As the American River meandered over a couple million years back and forth, it deposited and eroded. So we have channels, basically, where the groundwater flows and where the contamination resides. This picture really doesn't do justice as it shows these as being separated by these clay layers. In many instances they are, but there are actually very large holes through these. So we have mixed water going from A to B, B to C, C to D, and actually down to E, and we actually have F. And sometimes it comes back up to the direction from F, E to F, and D to C. So it's a good place to test rockets. I mean, not to test rockets for safety reasons, but for contamination for this purpose. Got into groundwater, it goes off-site fairly readily. So I brought you up to the partial consent decree. Now things start getting interesting. Aerojet has now required to begin its investigation of all the source areas. So from 1990 to 1993, all 330 sites are looked at in some manner. Conduct a sampling plan. They go out and sample all those and come up with a stage 1 report on what they found. Well, at the same time, as they're putting monitoring wells in, it was noticed that we have groundwater contamination extending under the American River into towards Fair Oaks. Well, that was never thought to be. The conceptual site model at the time said, hey, the American River's there. It's a barrier. Nothing's getting across the river. And the first monitoring well that was put in on the north side of the river showed that that was a false assumption. So that was basically that groundwater contamination off-site was a key component. Okay, this needs to be taken care of before it gets much farther. So EPA started the process on trying to get something done in the American River Study Area. That bogged down a bit due to public opposition on the north side of the river. The regional board decided, we'll take it over. And so we had Aerojet actually move the treatment plant that was proposed on the north side of the river back onto their own property. They built the pipeline underneath the river back to their own property to handle the contamination. And the project went under a cleanup and abatement order. And that was the first off-site, basically, extraction that was going on in Aerojet. For your information, basically 1994 is when I came in on the project. So everything after 1994, I'm either take credit for or I get blamed for. So I'll take both of them. December 1995, EPA comes out and says, perchlorate, it's worse than you thought. We thought it was like nitrate, 45 ppm. Four orders of magnitude lower. They say it's a concern of 4 to 18 parts per billion. We had 8,000 ppb of perchlorate at the property boundary in Aerojet. That started saying, well, we got to do something. So at the time, the reporting level Aerojet was required to report to us for perchlorate was 400 ppb. So we're still 2 orders of magnitude too high. We requested Aerojet to, what is your data that shows detections, not just reporting values, excuse me. What is the detection level? It's 100. They had been sampling water supply wells under the partial consent decree, a requirement. There's 3 wells that had over 100 parts per billion in it. For how long? We don't know. It was for years. People have been served this water with over 100 parts per billion in. That started us issuing clean abatement orders to Aerojet, regardless of what the partial consent decree said. You guys have to look at perchlorate. You have to evaluate your treatment systems for perchlorate and begin an investigation of perchlorate off property. Within a matter of months, the detection level we got down to 20, and then within 6 months it was down to 4. So it wasn't that perchlorate couldn't be found at lower concentration. There was no, at the set, there's no need to it. If the level is 45,000 ppb, you don't need to have a detection level lower than 400. But with the lower value, it was a concern. 11 water supply wells got shut off almost instantly. In fact, all the water supply wells for the area Sunrise, if you go down if you go to east here, down Sunrise, the 2 water supply wells that served all those businesses along there, they had over 50 parts per billion perchlorate in them. So we established weekly meetings with Aerojet and the water purveyors to come up with ways on how we're going to move water around, replace wells, put in pipelines, connect wells that aren't being used. And so that over the next year, basically all those 11 water supply wells, the supply was basically temporarily, at least temporarily replaced, and the public didn't see an impact on lost water supply.
Alex, wasn't it about that time also that NDMA laboratory methods were developed that could get
Sure.
down?
Right after perchlorate, when we had non-detect NDMA also. They said, well, if we had perchlorate, what's our detection level in NDMA? And it was also up to the 1 ppb
Yeah.
level. Level of concern was there was 2 parts per trillion. So we asked Aerojet to look at off-site water supply wells. And in fact, NDMA was not thought to be on the west side of the property. It's associated with liquid rocket fuel. If you remember the picture, liquid rocket fuel was on the far east. It was never thought to be on the west. So it really wasn't sampled in the water supply wells on the west. So that was added in 1997 to the investigation that they did. And turns out several water supply wells were turned out off just due to NDMA, not perchlorate. So yes, you're right, Carl. That was a issue that came around about the same time. Okay, next slide. So as I just talked about, we worked on lost water supply replacement. That was one of the things that drove a lot of my time from 1979 to 1999. At the same time, one of the local water purveyors said, no, this isn't working out too well for us. They're the ones that lost most of the water supplies. So they said, well, we're going to sue you, Aerojet, and we're also suing the state of California. Their contention was that these 4 groundwater extraction treatment systems that were put in place were public works projects. In fact, we thought that, that was ludicrous. We didn't see how they could be anyway construed to be public work projects. We had supplied them no funds. We had no approval on them. We did not even design. There was no waste discharge requirements. There's nothing we did. Aerojet built them on their own, and they got grandfathered in. And one of the reasons they're suing because of that was the discharge from those groundwater extraction treatment systems was injection. They extracted the groundwater, they injected the water back into the ground to create a barrier to help their containment on their property. Well, as I said, perchlorate wasn't a problem at the time. 81, 85, they were injecting 8,000 ppb of perchlorate at the property edge. So all that basically knocked out all those water supply wells was that injection of that perchlorate. So that's the reason they're really suing, they're trying to sue us, since those treatment plants caused their problem. What else did we do? After that lawsuit, we still had to work with water purveyors. We still worked with them hand in hand, even though they're suing us, to get their supplies replaced. And so the conclusion eventually of that lawsuit was they dropped the lawsuit. Aerojet agreed to pay them money to replace their water supplies. We were fortunate at the time. We had a insurance policy. It was written in 1962 that covered 1 year, and that insurance policy covered all our costs for outside lawyers and that sort of thing. So it helped quite a bit in that regard, and no one admitted any guilt, no one admitted any culpability. It was just settled and it went forward. So after that, I have on here, it says highlights 1990s, but I put in a modification of partial consent decree. At the time, I said perchlorate really wasn't covered well under the partial consent decree. We wanted to add that into the partial consent decree with specific limits on the treatment plants. We wanted Aerojet was wanting to do this also, but because of lawsuits, if it's in the partial consent decree, they're more covered. Plus, they wanted to carve out part of their property for development. So development comes into Aerojet's mind, and actually that has helped us speed things up, because if they want development, they're going to do things faster to get that development occurring. So what we did was we went out and looked at the property that are proposed for carve out, property that had never been used by Aerojet for anything. It was mostly buffer land. So we actually had them investigate the whole carve out property while leading up to this partial consent decree. And so we got that taken care of at the same time. Plus we got some money assurances to our office. We have another $75 million of insurance in case Aerojet defaults on something. We can tap into that money. So that partial consent decree modifications actually then divided the site up into operable units. If you remember, the site was the partial consent decree considered the site 1, with 350 sites inside of it. Well, this one basically takes that site and breaks it up into operable units so we can easily get our handle on the issues where we want to and make it much easier to manage. So one of the reasons of concern of that plume that was off property, what I'll show you on this slide here is all the public water supply wells in the vicinity of Aerojet. The green dots are the water wells that are currently operational. The red dots are the wells that have all been shut down. So 11 of these wells close to the property were the ones that were shut down initially. As Aerojet has been implementing remedy, some additional wells have gone down because it takes a while to get remedy in place. And you want to be attacking the leading edge of the plume. So some of these wells were not initially hit perchlorate, eventually got perchlorate in them, or NDMA in some instances. So you can see out here there's quite a number of lost water supplies. So that was basically that off-site water supply was the very first operable unit tackled by Aerojet. The Western Groundwater Operable Unit. It's about 20 square miles off Aerojet's property. They divided it up into 4 areas. Each area had its own treatment plant or treatment plants to handle the groundwater in that area. That basically was started with a record of decision in 2001. We're still finishing installing extraction wells and treatment systems to take care of this pollution. So then, it's not a fast process. 2001 to 2014, we're 13 years into it, and it's not like things are getting away. It's basically fine tuning and getting the last few extraction wells in place, the last, expanding treatment plants. So that was the first operable unit. So we implemented that operable unit by adding additional extraction wells on Aerojet. The goal was to stop additional flow coming off Aerojet to the west. They put in those extraction and treatment systems initially. They weren't complete. We had them beef that up. Then they constructed 5 off-property extraction and treatment systems to control the plume on the leading edge. They discharged that treated groundwater in an NPDES permit, even though under Superfund they say you do not need a permit. We convinced Aerojet that the permit is the way to go. And I think you've probably adopted changes of that probably 8 times since that period, since 2002. And you have one tomorrow, I believe. You can hear again. Added new extraction treatment facilities as needed, and then provide replacement water supplies. So within this operable unit is pretty unique. We convinced EPA that replacement water supplies is a critical issue. So in the partial consent decree requires Aerojet to replace water if the well goes down within 24 hours. So in other words, we can't wait. There's not an additional supply just sitting waiting to go initially. So what Aerojet had to do, work with the water purveyors to provide that capacity somewhere to be able to flip a switch on to at least temporarily replace that water supply within 24 hours and completely replace it within 18 months. Now, the final replacement, the interim might be the final, but at least we have something in place. And that's worked out pretty well. The water purveyors have been happy. We were cooperating with them. Aerojet has a good relationship with them now, and so that aspect's working out very well. So we took care of the west. That left the rest of the sides of Aerojet to take care of. You remember groundwater flow direction, if you remember, was going off this way and off this way and this way. So we had to, basically the goal was to take and control the groundwater at the Aerojet property boundary here and also at the leading edge in all those places. You see a gap here? Well, that's due to, if you remember, this is the White Rock Road dump. We have a cleanup and abatement order on that dump. Aerojet now owns it. So all the contamination coming from the dump and anything from the Superfund site is taken care of by that cleanup and abatement order in this area. So the goal was to do the same thing on the other 3 sides of Aerojet. They have actually EPA's issued a ROD for that, and they're busy implementing that ROD as we speak. So we're putting extraction treatment systems in these various areas. So that once those 2 operable units will take care of the groundwater, essentially off property. There's also the soil sites on property. So under that partial consent decree modification, we had Aerojet divided the site into operable units. So if you look in here, I've color-coded the operable units. The green area is that carve-out land that Aerojet wants to develop. That's 2,600 acres. That has actually been removed from the partial consent decree, and Aerojet is in the process of, they've finished the EIR for the development on part of it, so they will probably be breaking ground on development starting next year. this property was never, they didn't have any activities on it. So all that green area was deemed to be clean for basically unrestricted use, except for areas where we have shallow groundwater contamination with volatile organics, the TCEs, the solvents we talked about. Those can vaporize off groundwater and go through the soil column and up into the atmosphere, or if you put a building there, into that building. So there are certain areas where we have shallow groundwater with high enough concentrations of VOCs where that could be a problem. That area is restricted to commercial industrial use, or they have to put in engineering controls. They can have vent systems or soil vapor extraction systems or something to take care of that problem. So after carve out, the perimeter operable unit, remember that was taking care of the other sides, had some soil source areas within it, because Aerojet wants to develop all this property. They want to get those little islands out of there so they can develop those too. So that operable unit, the ROD is done, and so these soil remedies for these projects are ongoing now. This is the landfill. Aerojet's looking at spending $30 to $40 million. Pick this landfill up and take it away. So even though it's probably not a hazard to people working on the property, it's a stigma thing. So if the landfill is nearby, property's worth less money. So they're actually going to pick that up and move it. The next operable unit that we are currently working on, what EPA is working on the ROD as we speak, is the boundary operable unit. That's the light green areas. So that has 90 sites in it that we'll be taking action on, or no action. Most of them have no action, but we'll be taking actions on that areas. Central operable unit, that's the interior to Aerojet. That's the last one we're working on Aerojet. Eastern operable unit is liquid rocket test area. The island operable unit, we call it islands, these little blue areas sitting out here. This is the worst sites on Aerojet. This is where you have TCE at the solubility limit, or pure TCE below the groundwater. So you find, you said level of concern was 5 parts per billion. There's wells out here with 1 million. So the goal is here to address these concentrations at the source area. So right now we don't really have technology identified that can actually take that out of the groundwater at that high concentration. So probably we're looking at least containing it with local extraction systems that can handle really high concentrations, so we don't allow that to continue to bleed off and continue to move off. Even though we have the property boundaries covered with the perimeter operable unit, these are going to take care of the source areas and hopefully speed up cleanup. Last ones we see out here, Cabot Ranch. This is an area of shallow groundwater, bedrock's at 2 feet, fractured rock. Groundwater moves a foot per year. There is solvent out here at significant concentrations, but it's on property. It's moving very slowly, and so it's kind of down on the list of to be taken care of. So where's the groundwater contamination? Here's Aerojet, 40 square miles is what you see here. What I've done here is, if you remember those layers I showed you, I squished them all into one. So this is the contamination, the farthest extent in any layer. As you move to the east, as you move to the west, this groundwater is down at 300 to 400 feet. Back here on the property, it's in the shallow groundwater. But as we move off property, this thing gets deeper and deeper and deeper. If you remember those layers, things have moved down deeper. And where Aerojet injected their water was at 200 to 300 feet. It's nice, really nice gravel zone that took a lot of water. Well, that's actually where all the water purveyors also take a lot of water. So any water you put in contamination, big concern is that perchlorate moving off the property. So if you look out here, this plume that says perchlorate right here, that was due to injection. So from here, they injected along this property boundary, and it went all the way down to here. And that's, this right here is, if you're familiar with the area, this is Zinfandel. Okay. Our office sits right here. Excuse me, that's not Zinfandel, that's Mather Boulevard. Zinfandel's right there. So we have NDMA showing out here, TCE, and perchlorate. Those are the 3 main contaminants of concern. We have really low concentrations of the other solvents out here. If you look at the question is, why do we have NDMA way out here? Well, we haven't really figured that one out exactly yet. My hypothesis is, if you look at Buffalo Creek, it flows across Aerojet property, and in the old days, it actually went out to some ponds sitting out here. It was a sand and gravel operation. Well, they had spills on their property of hydrazine-based fuels, where the NDMA is found. It migrated in that groundwater, and we had fish kills in 1961 due to hydrazine in these ponds. So all of a sudden, you drop NDMA off property right here. So actually, the highest concentration of NDMA we had off property is right underneath the NDMA sign. So it was really how it got there that fast. That's the only thing we've come up with. Doesn't really matter how it got there. We were still cleaning up in the same manner we would. You notice an active Rancho Cordova test site. Its plumes also extend onto Mather Field. Their extraction system's taking care of the stuff down here, and you see plumes off in every direction. So I said when I took over the project in 1994, this was the defined extent of contamination. This was the American River Study Area, going off into Fair Oaks, TCE off here. So as I said, when I took it over here, I have done a very good job of making it twice as big. I look at it, as I said, I take the credit for, I'll take the blame for making it bigger, but also take the credit for now we know about this plume when we didn't know about it before due to the lower detection limits and so we're actually having Aerojet take care of this. So this problem is now being taken care of. This is our highest priority, was the plumes extending off their property.
Yes,
Can
Carmen?
Yes.
Can you go back to
Yeah.
that slide? And my question is,
Yes.
I'd like to see a slide that has this information with an overlay of where the existing water wells
Oh,
are
sure.
for the
Okay.
city.
Okay.
Do you have that one like that coming up, or can you generally point them out?
I might be able. Oh yeah, the water supply wells. Excuse me. If you look at where all those water supply wells that were shut down.
Well, I'd like to see.
Oh, where the ones
active
are operating?
Right.
Right. The ones we have operating, we have a bunch up here in Carmichael, but they're probably they're about a mile away from the plume.
Okay.
And we have extraction wells there and here, and there might be another one proposed in this vicinity. Basically, so far, Carmichael water supply has been protected.
And how deep is that? The Carmichael wells.
Those
do
are
you know?
400 feet, and deeper.
Okay.
Here on this side of the river, up also elevation, we're another 100 feet up. So the depth to groundwater is greater. So the depth to the contamination is a little bit bigger, even though it's in the same aquifer as over on this side of the property.
But it sounds like, given because of the cone of depression, they're probably monitored all the time.
All the time.
looking
In fact,
for-
monthly, essentially.
Okay.
And one of my tasks is to monitor the water supply wells monthly also. I split samples with Aerojet on the wells. There are wells not that far on the other side of the plume here. There's a group of wells in this location. There's 4 or 5 within half a mile of the plume. So this was one of the areas we were really concerned with, and Aerojet's actually put in 2 more extraction wells in the last 6 months to help control this. So we don't want to see any more wells go down. There are limited supplies, and where do you get more water? It's really hard.
And do we know if anybody out there is sort of rural enough, or I
Private
don't
wells?
know, where they're doing private wells?
Well, we had Aerojet to do a private well survey. There were a few of them, but most of them are located. You see my cursor? They're sitting out off over in this direction. So, where'd it go? Why'd it go back? Previous. So there are a number of water supply wells in very close vicinity to here. The latest one got put in is right here. It's replacement water supply wells are sitting right up in this vicinity, just south of the American River. Right in here, there's 3 wells that pump a total of 7,000 GPM. Huge amount of flow, and so making sure that the containment system for this has been beefed up has been also a priority to us.
Okay, all right. I just
Yeah. So next time I'll
yeah.
make
Well,
sure
I
it's
guess
slide together.
I guess we just want to make sure that people who live there who might be affected know, and that they can take whatever precautions they need to take.
Sure.
Including abandoning wells or whatever.
Oh,
they have.
right. There are a couple. There were private wells right in this vicinity, right next between Aerojet and the inactive Rancho Cordova test site. They're on water supply wells. There's a lady right here that owns a couple, like 500 or 600 acres. She's on private wells. We sample her water all the time. We actually put a monitoring well up at the edge of the plume, right in front, so we have a leading indicator to make sure she's protected. Most of the ones in here all have been abandoned. This whole area has been studied for development, and so the individual wells, there's only one house sitting down here that has a well still operational. as drinking water supply.
Because of the regulatory activity with Aerojet and so forth, I would have to say that this is probably one of the sites that we have the most oversight on. That
Oh,
it's unbelievable. I might point out this project, as you've gathered, is being driven by technology. We weren't really able to pick up low levels of perchlorate or NDMA until the 90s. When this thing started, and for a long time, the technology just wasn't there, the analytical capability to be able to get down to those kinds of levels, nor our understanding of the health impacts. Now it's progressed to the point where there is, in fact, a Department of Defense site in the Inland Empire that folks are working on, that there is a process being evaluated. It looks very promising that, in fact, will pull the chlorate out of the water. This is a biological process, so you don't really end up with any noxious materials that you have to deal with after that, and produce a safe water that if they meet their test criteria, which it looks like they will, it can go directly into the drinking water supply. So we're looking for the kinds of technologies down the road that can, as Alex pointed out, water supplies can be limited out here, particularly as this area continues to develop. And if we can take this water, if we can make safe water out of it, it just aids in the cleanup effort.
good segue to my next slide. Aerojet treatment systems. So all these blue boxes are current aerojet treatment systems. The one I show the picture on here is the GET-EF system. Aerojet originally had a GET-E and a GET-F when those original systems were in place. Aerojet combined them to GET-EF. This is the original GET-EF facility before perchlorate. This handled TCE. This system is now the new groundwater extraction treatment system. In fact, if I had a more recent picture, this would be expanded in size still. What you see here is this is the pump room. On the other side, we have fluidized bed reactors where Aerojet takes the water and provides alcohol as a food source to the bugs. The bugs grow within these fluidized bed reactors, as Carl was talking about, degrade the perchlorate, so all you left is chloride ions, essentially. Then after they go through that process, it has to go through a sand filter to remove that biomass. You grow biomass dies. Just like any wastewater treatment plant, the normal system, you have biosolids that you need to take care of. It goes to these, it gets removed here, goes to a clarifier, and then that solids are taken to the sewer. After that water, so the perchlorate's gone, and actually that system actually removes some VOCs at the same time. It goes to a UV system, ultraviolet light, to take care of NDMA. Very high energy use. You have to get down to parts per trillion range. If you're starting in the parts per billion range, it's a big use of water. Big use of energy. They're actually, Aerojet is SMUD's biggest energy user. Then it goes to, you see these tall white towers, those are the air strippers. Remove the remaining VOCs out of the ground. This UV system will also take care of a lot of the VOCs so that we'll only have to polish it moving out of here. So that's their most complex system. The ones off property, perchlorates at low enough concentrations that they don't use the biological system, they use ion exchange. Sorbs onto resin like granular activated carbon will take care of VOC solvents. This perchlorate is easily removed by this ion exchange system. Then when it gets saturated, they haul that stuff off, and it gets either burned because it has a BTU value for energy, or it gets landfilled. The other systems, you see AC6 here and AC18, those are Golden State water supply wells. They have perchlorate ion exchange systems on them. Aerojet and the company have worked out an agreement whereby they pump those 24 hours a day. They made them lead wells because they are actually helping control the plume. The plume was already to them, and they're at the leading edge of the plume. It didn't make any sense for Aerojet to put extraction wells in to compete with that water. So this water is now being pumped up and being used by the public. So no problems removing that down to non-detect. Get HA-HB, 2 treatment systems, one by Aerojet, one by Boeing, which is the former McDonnell Douglas, is now Boeing. One handles the plume associated with Aerojet, one handles the plume coming off the inactive Rancho Cordova test site. And then as we move to the east, you see a spray field PBA and a Sigma in situ groundwater. Those are kind of unique systems to this. The PBA basically takes up groundwater, has a biological system also in an above ground cargo container filled with sand. And all they do is add some alcohol to, actually, they use citric acid, add that to it as their food source, perchlorate goes away. So it's a very passive system, and then they discharge it back to ground. The in situ system is a recirculation of groundwater. They pull the groundwater up, add, in this case, they add acetic acid, vinegar, food-grade vinegar as the food source, inject it back into the ground, and they use the below-ground system to degrade the perchlorate. It basically sets a biological system in situ underground, and it takes care of the perchlorate underground. And that worked out very well.
Alex, on the previous slide,
Yes.
where you're showing the plumes, has one of those plumes flown under Mather?
Oh, yeah. Let me go back to the previous slide. Yes. See this? Here's Mather.
Right.
This plume of perchlorate is going under Mather. It's under the Mather Field plume, the Air Force plume.
They have
It's on
their
top.
own. There's problems there from the Air Force operations.
You're right. The Air
is that
Force
correct?
caused mostly solvents. Carbon tetrachloride, PCE, and TCE were used there, and it's at the ground, basically at the upper water table down to about 200 feet. The plume from the inactive Rancho Cordova test site is down 250 to 450 feet. So it's below the two. So the two plumes are separated, which is good for, at least we can differentiate who has responsibility. Back this piece. So the in situ system has been working fairly well. Tyker is one of those things. Tyker, I used to stand a gravel operation out here. They put their water supply got TCE in it, then it got perchlorate in it. So Aerojet put treatment systems on their water supply well, and have actually, this is for the White Rock Road dump, and actually put in 2 extraction wells to actually tie into that treatment system. So they're reusing the water and treating the water where they can. Where does all that water go? Well, Aerojet discharges most of it to surface water. Most of it goes to the American River. And if you look at all these yellow diamonds is where the discharges occur, the triangles. The little plus signs are where we actually sample the receiving water, upstream and downstream of every different discharge to the river. Down here, it's Morrison Creek is the site of where Get HA and HB, and the Southern Groundwater Study Area gets discharged to surface water. This is all under the MPDS permit. It's the permitted flow is currently, well, it's proposed to be 29,000 GPM. So we were talking, if they actually pumped at that rate, which they probably very seldom ever will get that, that's 45,000 acre feet of water per year. It's a good amount of water. And so what this picture shows, so if you look at if you went to the edge of this whole of this complete blob, that's basically the plume of contamination. So within let's say the Get LA, Get LB, this volume of water is what's being controlled by the groundwater extraction treatment system in Get LA and LB. Get K controls this water, etc. So every single one of the portions of the plume is being controlled by some groundwater extraction treatment system. Said we're just finishing making sure we have complete control of all these systems to be able to protect all those groundwater supply wells off property. The Boeing system and the ones in purple down here. So this is the Superfund site up here. This is the non-Superfund site down in this vicinity.
Alex,
Yes.
do you anticipate any further growth of these plumes?
No. I mean, well, there could be site leakage occurring. There is a portion up here. The remedy for up here is kind of interesting. In the record of decision for the perimeter operable unit, EPA has selected containment to the MCL of TCE and perchlorate. Good and fine. However, a portion of that plume is outside, above those plume is outside the extraction field. And EPA is proposing just to let that go. Monitor natural attenuation, but they're not calling it that. So there's a portion of the plume that could expand. There's a extraction well proposed, already sited and located, but not drilled, at the leading edge. It would be the leading edge of that plume if it gets that far. So if it gets that far, they'll turn it on. But they're anticipating that attenuation will take care of that plume. So that could be a slight expansion area. But the rest of this, hopefully, it's not going to expand any more than it is.
Right. Based upon modeling, do you expect these plumes to be attenuated to any degree in the next decade or two?
They'll be, the leading edge won't get any smaller. You'll still have, because we have higher concentrations back here that are still migrating towards those extraction fields. You do see internally concentrations of dropping. they're actually at the extraction wells on the edge of the property, those concentrations have dropped 50% or more. So the concentrations have been dropping. The extent won't get any smaller until you've cleaned up, because we are controlling, if you look at controlling at the edge and controlling at the leading edge, all that water in between has to be cleaned up. So the pollutants that were at the edge of the property have got to migrate all the way across to those extraction fields on the far side. So that takes a while. Western Groundwater Upper Unit, initial EP estimate was 250 years. So we're 10, 12 years into it, so we have 238 more to go. I don't plan on having a talk when that gets completed.
I don't think I'll be a board member then.
Well, you never know, Dr. Longley. You've been on for a while.
So I wanted to show you what happened from 2006, last time I talked to you, to 2008. Here's what we've done in groundwater. All those big blue dots are new extraction wells that have gone in. These extraction systems are already out there. I talked about the 2 in situ type treatment systems were installed. Get EF has been expanded from roughly 4,500 GPM to 8,000 GPM. They moved Get D is no longer there. It moved to the American River Study Area Treatment System, and they expanded that one. They moved Get A to Get B and expanded that one. So this one went from roughly 1,500 GPM to 3,500 GPM. This system's gone up to 3,500 GPM from operating at 2,000. So all these systems have been expanded. So you essentially, all these other dots you see on here are all the extraction wells that were in place at the time in 2006. So the blue ones are the new ones. The large blue ones are the new extraction wells. And I color-coded them initially because all the green ones went to Get D, all the blue, these dark blue ones up here went to the American River Study Area System, pink ones went to Get J, et cetera, so I could differentiate between them all. And those changes, 2006, the treatment flow at the time was 13,000 gallons per minute. 2004, the proposed permitted treatment systems, you see them on 29,500. They probably pump 19 to 20,000 GPM today. They will probably, if they peak out, they hit here, but more than likely they won't reach that amount. Aerojet treated 77 billion gallons by 2006. Now it's over 135 billion gallons, so flow is almost 45% more. Pounds moved per day, you see it's 150 pounds, that hasn't changed. And that's due to a lot of the increased flow we see is the perimeter wells with the low concentrations in them. And meanwhile, the wells back on property, concentrations are dropping. So between the additional flow, increasing flow, the concentrations overall have stabilized or have gone down. So that's why we're not removing any more poundage per day. And that doesn't take into account any in situ groundwater remediation we're also doing. And then how many pounds removed? 650,000 pounds in 2006. They're just over 1 million pounds today. So big changes have occurred. Current groundwater activities, we're completing capture of the western groundwater and perimeter groundwater upper plumes. We're implementing the perimeter groundwater upper remedy. Expanding, as I said, we talked about, we expanded treatment systems. We're supplying treated groundwater. That's one of the things interesting. Aerojet has taken their Ansel-Hoffman system, Get LA, that supplies golf course water. So up to 600 GPM of their water goes to the golf course. Another thing that goes on, that's basically saving the county $100,000 a year in water costs. So that's, they were a little happy to have that groundwater treatment plant in Ansel-Hoffman once they saw the savings they were going to get. The county of Sacramento gets 8,500 acre feet per year, which they take out at the Freeport plant down on the Sacramento River. Carmichael Water District gets 5,000 actually buys 5,000 acre feet of water from Aerojet, and it's taken out at their off the American River in their current system. They're also working with supplying Golden State Water Company, which supplies our building here. They're looking at a system where they're going to take the water off the river, pipe it back on the American River, and provide it to Golden State, 5,000 acre feet, which Aerojet will then is paying for all that system going in. And then Aerojet also takes their Get AB water, which is on the far east, and has now replaced their industrial water supply with that water. So it's basically saving the city of Folsom their contract with them. So it's 1,000 gallons a minute that normally the city of Folsom would have to be supplying them. Now they can turn around and use that in their own area where they have water shortage. You know, they take the water off the Folsom Lake, and it's not. If you've been out there lately, you can see where the lake is fairly low. So they're in almost. You know, they were talking about water rationing at one point. So this 1,000 gallons a minute has helped them out quite a bit. And last thing, tentative innovative technology. They're testing innovative technologies. Aerojet doesn't want to have to pay for NDMA removal. It's very expensive. It's a UV system. They would rather, they're hunting and looking at biological degradation of NDMA. One of the ways is using propanotrophs, which actually use propane as a food source, and they will actually degrade perchlorate. So, and they also have things called, they have a company looking at taking bacteria, encapsulating it into a bead. So the water, it's porous to water and the contaminant, but it holds the bacteria within it. So what happens is the stuff goes in it with a food source, degrades the NDMA, and the bugs stay within the capsule. After a while, you have to take out the capsule and put new ones in place. But if that works, that could save Aerojet, you know, quite a bit of money per year, and also save on you know, different waste streams and, you know, greenhouse gases, all that sort of thing. So they're testing. I want to show you them testing another innovative technology. This is called an iron filing wall. I don't know if you've if you had a presentation on Beale Air Force Base lately, but they have something fairly similar. Well, basically, this is a wall that's 25 feet deep. They anchor into bedrock, so it's one of the few places on Aerojet they have bedrock that shallow. This trench is 2 feet wide. It's filled up with ground-up cars. So basically, using the steel iron of the cars, you put it in the ground, mix it with sand so it has some porosity to it. You then take that iron in the groundwater rusts. When it rusts, it releases hydrogen. The hydrogen is then used, basically will help break the bond of the TCE. So on the upgradient side, which is on the right side, groundwater is flowing through this wall. Comes in at 20,000 ppb, 30,000 ppb, comes out non-detected on the other side. On the other side, down, if you see this little white flag, there's actually another wall Aerojet constructed here, a bio wall. Very similar to this, but they had ports in it where they could inject corn syrup and other food. You know, they try all these different foods. Corn syrup as a food for the bacteria. Well, that was to take care of perchlorate. Well, lo and behold, for some reason they haven't figured out yet, the perchlorate's also being taken out. They don't know why the perchlorate's being taken out. There's no biological activity within the wall. They've done tests. They've actually sampled for bacteria presence. Conditions are such that bacteria won't survive within this wall. The only thing they can guess is as this hydrogen is being released, it's moving outside out here, and also the bugs are growing outside the wall, right in front of the wall, and that bacteria then is taking care of the perchlorate. But they haven't been able to verify it because it's a very short distance, and so until they, well, I told them to get some grad students out there for a project, and they can figure out what's going on. So that's one of the innovative technologies going on. And this wall is only a portion of the plume. They're looking at the remedy for the site, which happens to be TCE solvent sumps sitting off here to your right. And so this plume extends underneath this and goes all the way to Aerojet, back onto Aerojet property. And the length of the plume, this is only a subset. They're looking at maybe expanding this to be like basically 1,000 feet long instead of, this is only 80 feet. So that's one of the things we're looking at doing. Simple, low key, low tech, doesn't cost them a whole lot. A couple other things that's going on since 2006, Aerojet is now Aerojet Rocketdyne. Aerojet bought one of its competitors, so it's actually the rocket company now for the United States. That happened last year. Another thing that's happened is the solar field. Aerojet's built, this is the first of two parts of the solar field Aerojet built. First one, 3 megawatts. They built another 3 megawatt plant just on the other side of this road. This 6 megawatts supplies about 50% of the energy needs for their treatment systems. Okay, 6 megawatts is just their treatment systems, and that's only 50%. It takes 2.5 megawatts just for them to pump groundwater up and get it to the treatment plant. So anything they can do to save, and SMUD is really happy about this because now that, you know, that frees up that energy to be used somewhere else. And the other thing that's gone, Aerojet's development, remember we talked about that? This is the 2,600 acres. This 4,000 acres is already in the process of being developed. No construction has gone on yet, but this part here has been released, and Elliott Homes is going to be one developing this. Aerojet Real Estate is going to be developing the rest of this property. The landfill sat over here. You know, this is the first housing to be going in starting next year. The key issue here is, do you have to remove the landfill prior to putting houses in, or you can remove the landfill afterwards? So the local county health department and the county health agency is saying, well, we think you should move it before, because the citizens now you're going to potential air issues. If there's something in this landfill now, it's going to be mobilized by dust or something that now they're going to breathe in. So those discussions are ongoing, and we're working with Aerojet to develop land use covenants, which I'll show in this next slide. So from now on, from today forward, we're completing plume containment. That's our first goal, making sure that's taken care of. We're adding groundwater remedies at those off-site properties to the east. Groundwater at source areas to make sure those are taken under control. Completing record decisions and implementing remedies. If you remember, there was up to 10, I think I showed you 10 operable units. It's going to take another decade just to get the record decisions done for to get to that last operable unit. So that's just getting the records and decisions in place. Then implementing those remedies takes quite a while. Remember, Western Groundwater, we've already been working on it for 13 years, and we haven't quite gotten there yet. So my last slide here, I want a little education. I have a compatriot that works he's a professor at the University of Colorado State University. He's probably our ITRC team, which is Interstate Technical Regulatory Council, which I'm part of. He wanted to look at, he had a grad student. He said, we want to see what happens with in subsurface. So it's easy to get stuff into the ground. It's hard to get it out. And so one of the things you guys are going to be dealing with is a lot of salt issues. And even if you remove all the salt, no more salt load to the groundwater, it's going to take a long, long time to take it back out of the groundwater. And this basically slide will show you one of the reasons that's occurring. So what he had to do is he had his grad student construct a box, filled it with sand, and if you look you'll see layers inside. Those layers are the clay layers, like I showed you that slide of Aerojet, and so they inject a dye on the side, and you see the dye going across the screen. And the bottom will be it's a timeline. So basically, it's a time-lapse photography. Every second is a day, and then you see 20 hours just flying by. So you see them start discharging this dye, and watch it. And you'll see it diffusing into the clay layers. They turn it off after day 24, and you watch, and it's still, even though the dye goes away, you see the dye continue to diffuse in the clay layers. And then after a period of time, it stops, and it starts diffusing out. So the time it takes to diffuse in is pretty quick, and if that was only 24 days, picture Aerojet, that stuff's been down there for 50 years. It's gone into those clay layers, and it's sitting there. And now you remove the source area, you have clean water flowing by, and it's just bleeding off. It's bleeding off, bleeding off. And so that's why it takes 250 years of water sweeping through this to take care of it. So hopefully this worked. Oh, no, don't totally. Okay, go back to previous slide. It worked 3 times. Okay, here we go. So Tom Sale, professor at Colorado State University, and that's his grad student. So it's not very big. So day 1 to 2023, the source is on, and then they do 132. So it's here you see the clay layers, A, B, C, D. And then they'll start it here, and you'll see the dye come in. And you see the times going, days, 3, 4 days. So you see it moving. And if you watch carefully, you can see the light green starts creeping up into the clay unit. And this one's already 2/3 of the way across. And they only have 6 more days to go. So they turn it off. Fresh water is sweeping through, and so you see the light green. And if you look at it, it's right here. But still days going by. Now it's up to here. It's still migrating, and you see the on this side you see the dye coming off of these clay layers. And after a while, you won't be able to see this clay. But they show you a slide later at the end, which shows you still have concentrations coming off, even though you can't see it. It's just not at the high enough concentration, so it is visible. So I wish I could speed this up. So now you look, see, it's almost completely green all the way through this clay layer. So it's migrated, and so now it migrates to lowest concentration, it goes, diffuses from highest concentration to lowest concentration. So now the high concentrations are within here, and it's lower outside, so it's going to diffuse back out the other way. I think it goes 140, 60. Okay, I didn't want to. Got basically the same thing over again. If you look at the, if you at the end, if you see there's a graph at the end that shows it tailing off at a steady concentration. So even though you couldn't see it, steady concentration is still coming out the other end. So even in your salts, your farmers, your dairies, your municipalities don't discharge any more salt. That's stuck in this clay. I mean, it's saturated in there. It's going to take a while for that to come out. And with salts, I don't know how you're going to clean that up per se. So. Any questions? That's basically my presentation.
Any questions or comments from board members?
I have a few, but you want me to go first?
Go ahead, John.
Alex, thank you. And you took me out to that well way back when, right?
Yeah, and the active Rancho Cordova test site.
Right,
It's how I'm
so,
drilling the well.
I've been out there and just to see the cobbles and the terrain, and it is fascinating. I'm assuming they're still testing out there, or no?
A rocket test?
Yes.
Actually, the physical testing of rockets has moved. They moved it to Nevada, and they moved it to we do some in Arkansas. But it makes sense, because they want to develop this property. You're not going to have rocket testing anywhere nearby. So they've actually moved those operations away.
So I just wrote these as I was thinking of them, so they may not be in perfect order. Do you have a replacement?
Do I have a replacement?
Is there somebody coming behind you? Because there's a lot of knowledge that
No.
we hate to lose.
No.
And he's here to ask for a raise.
Yeah. No. Well, it'll be,
Because
be someone.
I guess the
It'll
question
be
is,
easy.
because I know you work on it full time, and do you have? Is there a larger group than just you, or
No.
what happens if?
It's me. It's probably 70% of my job. I have other little things I do, but I see if the time comes for me to leave, I'm sure we'll transition someone and they'll work with me for a while. And we have really good people in our section, so I don't see it being that big of an issue.
Okay. You mentioned a few times cost. Is this all being borne by Aerojet, or is there Superfund?
Correct. It is a Superfund project, but is all paid for by private party. So Aerojet, it was estimated in 1992 that it'd be $1 billion. That was 1992. Before we knew about perchlorate, before we knew about the off-site plume, that's what the government office estimated. The way it works is Aerojet has agreements with the Department of Defense. Their current agreements say they get reimbursed up to 90% of their costs. But it's not like they get a check. But how they work is, we're going to build you a rocket. Okay, we get to tack on that on our overhead rate. So this rocket, instead of costing $1 million, is now $1,100,000. And that money, then that's how Aerojet gets reimbursed. So you never see in the federal line budget cleanup for Aerojet X dollars. It's always hidden within the cost of the rocket. And what happens is that makes them less competitive because, that's actually a tax on them. But fortunately for them, every other rocket company out there has similar issues, has similar agreements. So the playing field is essentially level, but it's another issue.
Now, is there a cost effectiveness threshold, or things have to be done no matter what the cost?
We haven't reached the threshold. We have no threshold sitting there. Right now, it's whatever the costs are. But it could be that, this water, instead of treating it down to X level, Y level is better. I mean, we don't need to get that last 1%. Somebody could say that, okay, we don't have to get down to 10 to minus 6 risk. We're only going to get down to 10 to minus 5 risk. What I'm saying, 10 to minus 6 risk means 1 in a million chance of getting cancer if you drink this for 70 years. Well, we'll change it from 1 in a million to 1 in 100,000 and say that is okay. I mean, that's the only way you reduce, that's the way cost could be done. EPA could decide that, one in 10,000 is sufficient.
Okay. The new housing going in. Quick story. I was going to buy a house near the Frontier Fertilizer site in Davis,
Oh, good.
and I worked at the air district. And I knew we were airstripping, and so I asked the question, and the real estate agent said, "Oh yeah, the FDA is looking at this. It's all good." And the FDA obviously is not the right agency to even be quoting it. So I was just wondering. That's why it was all good.
Sure.
Is there the notice to the residents? Is this going to be an ongoing issue? How's
Right.
that going to be handled?
Currently, as you look at, currently Aerojet has, on its property, it has 2 systems of air strippers. What would have to be done is, well, what actually happens is they do an air risk assessment. They look at the stack emissions off there. They do the modeling to say what would be the potential impact. If there's an adverse impact, then they have to provide potentially air treatment train on the end of that. Originally, Aerojet had on its original air strippers, they had a system whereby they recondensed the TCE coming off of them and then disposed of that TCE. The concentration dropped very low since then. I mean, much lower, and so they're not required to. However, since those models are based on those current conditions, now they have to model saying, okay, if development's coming, how people are now this close, is there still a risk? So that's a requirement to be done. So they have to do a health risk assessment on the air emissions from their treatment systems.
So, but is there a notice if I'm buying a house in this new development?
Oh,
will I be noticed?
Oh, sure. One of the things that we're working on is also land use covenants. That's another thing we deal with lawyers on, developing those land use covenants for the property. There are standard land use covenants on you can't extract groundwater, you can't recharge the groundwater. There's limited restrictions on that sort of thing, unless you get permission to do it from our office. Then there's other restrictions on use of the property. If it's not basically if it's 10 to the minus 6 risk or less, unrestricted use. Between 10 to the minus 4 to 10 to the minus 6, you can you potentially use the property, but there are use restrictions and notifications saying that this is here. Greater than 10 to the minus 4 risk, there has to be some remediation taken to reduce that risk. So that's the 10 to the minus 4 to 10 to the minus 6 is the play area. Do you take a remedial action or not? And so there is a requirement at a minimum of land use covenants and land use restrictions and notification. One of the things we're working on currently, just the other day, is how do you, once Aerojet subdivides this property, people now the owners of the property, different than Aerojet. How do you make sure that they are going to abide by the land use covenants? And now, is there a homeowners association you deal with? Do you want to deal? Do the regulatory agencies want to deal with 3,000 homeowners? Making sure every year they submit a report saying yes, they've complied with they've done the inspection. Not really. So they're trying to work out establishing mechanisms where you have a group that we deal with and actually have to supply us with actually annual reports. And it could be that some of the systems, you remember I talked about off-gassing off of groundwater? So they would put in a passive system to remove that so it doesn't enter the house. It goes up, vents out the sides and up in the atmosphere. So it doesn't build up within the house. But you have to, who's going to make sure that those are maintained? Who's going to make sure that those are always operating? So they have to be almost, foolproof. And so those are some of the things I would be worrying about.
Sounds like Aerojet's going to need an easement under, 200 feet under all the property.
Oh, they basically
they'll always
retained
have.
all the water rights, everything to the water. People don't have, when they buy the house, they don't have any ownership of anything below ground. And so everything to 10 feet is that in a residential use has made sure it's been cleaned up to unrestricted use. So 10 feet or below, because that's the normal excavation of a pool. So it might come in contact, but below 10 feet down, there could be pollutants remaining that would pose a risk if you brought them to the surface, or a risk to groundwater that remain and they're getting to groundwater and we're picking them up in the groundwater extraction system.
And then, thank you. That's all helpful. The last question is, what if we stop building rockets? Is there a financial assurance plan, or how's that work?
One of the things is, if you look at, there's an agreement between Aerojet and the DOD, that 90% agreement. So essentially, DOD said, we're responsible for this contamination, and we're paying you back. You built rockets for us. We basically supplied you with perchlorate. We told you how to use it, handle it, how to dispose of it, and they followed those rules. So if Aerojet goes say Aerojet goes out of business, there are some financial assurances that we have in place, but we could also go after Department of Defense for that various purposes. Plus, Aerojet's parent company is General Tire. So they're a conglomerate of many, many, many different businesses, not just Aerojet. They're still on the hook.
Carmen.
Well, I'm really impressed at how the technology's gotten better and the science and everything. But the last part of the presentation sort of sounded like an EJ issue that's coming up. So that's a little troubling for me. But I don't know that there's very much we can do other than make sure that people get notice and take precautions. But it does sound like an EJ issue that's going to be coming up. It just sounds like an expensive place to be involved with. So anyway, so I appreciate the presentation. This is just so complex. I mean, more complex than I imagined, and it looks like it's only going to continue to get that way.
Yeah, for a while.
Yeah.
My goal originally before I retired was to get all the operable units done, and that's not going to happen. But hopefully to get things in place so that it's on basically cruise control.
Well, and you've done a lot, and you're a very responsible steward, and I'm very glad that you're involved and that you're part of the solution. So I thank you for your commitment, and I think that the residents in this area have a lot to be grateful for too. So thank you.
And I'm fortunate that I actually live in the area too. So when I talk to the residents, we have public meetings all the time. So when I talk, I'm actually one of them. So it actually has helped me, I think, out that I'm not trying to snow them on something. Before I bought out here, I actually looked at Aerojet, what it was, what the contamination was, and decided, yeah, I'm okay. So.
And I think this site provides an example of what happened, the kind of activities that happened before we had requirements for environmental reporting, and certainly with the advent of the environmental programs in the early 1970s, these reporting requirements came online. This kind of activity, I don't think could happen today.
You mean that page and a half wouldn't be enough today?
That page, well, and then moving on to this board's activities early on, we weren't even part of the water boards as we know them today, and the regulations weren't there. Certainly the Port of Cologne wasn't there, nor a lot of the other state regulations there that give us the authorities we have today. So I commend you on great work, and
So Dr. Longley, if I can just make a point.
It's fortunate, though, that there is a deep pocket and a willing discharger here. The questions that both of you were asking can address those issues over the years to come. Yes.
So Alex, your last comment to the board members, you knew about Aerojet, and so you did your investigation. I think the concerns you're hearing from our members is that not everyone's going to know like you do, and what assurances do we have that I don't know what the price range of homes will be, but it's going to be close to the freeways, so it may be starter homes or something. The people who are less informed are made informed so that they can make a conscious decision to go ahead and buy, just like you felt comfortable with it, but you did the research. They may not know. So I guess in our dealings with Aerojet and EPA, those kind of assurances be put in place.
Yeah, right now, you look at outreach to the public is, this EPA is basically their responsibility to do this sort of thing and direct Aerojet to do it. And historically, it's been pretty minimal. People out there are not aware of actually what's going on. I mean, they actually conceive it being worse than it actually is.
It may be EPA's responsibility, but I feel we have
No.
a responsibility too.
Correct.
So we need to work with EPA to ensure that those kinds of notices take place, information to potential buyers.
And then we've established a community advisory council group.
Yes.
That we meet every 2 months. For a while there, we had a lot of people, and since the initial wells being shut down and everything, that's all settled down. It's only 20 people that we talk to every 2 months, and so it's hard to get. We're trying to get that group to grow and to spread the word. That we send out fact sheets. The Aerojet's required to post their plume in the paper every year, but sometimes we don't trumpet the success stories that's actually been going on, so.
But they need to know what the situation is
Correct.
before they buy, so they're
Yes.
informed buyers.
And every deed, these land use covenants are put in every deed. So before and I know most people probably don't read all their CC&Rs and all that sort of thing. When I moved in, my CC&R book was 2 inches thick. There's 50 pages on Aerojet. So
I know, but
but not here. I'm saying hopefully the same process gets transferred over. And I mean, I deal with the people that are actually buying property south of Aerojet, south of the inactive Rancho Cordova test site in the Anatolia developments. I was getting calls all the time. Is there pollution under my property? Am I drinking the water? Is there contamination here? I would get those calls once a week, and,
Right.
and so at least, and so obviously the information isn't getting out to that development.
Well, what I was going to say is that, by the time people get their grant deed and their CC&Rs, they've signed already.
Right.
So something like a mandated disclosure, something that you initial on the initial purchase contract, and this is more coming from an attorney, like the kinds of, required notices that might satisfy a disclosure like this. But I mean, I'm sure Aerojet's got, plenty of attorneys, but just something like that I think is going to be important going forward.
Yes, I agree.
I just have to endorse fully what Carmen's saying.
I agree.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I have no cards on this. Is there anybody that wishes to address the board on this information item? Seeing none, we will take a short break until 10 after 11. Thank you, gentlemen. We are now on agenda item. Oops, I got the wrong agenda item. We're now on agenda item 11, salt and boron discharges update. At this time, staff will present an update on the control program for salt and boron discharges into the lower San Joaquin River. This is an information item only, and no action will be taken, although the board may ask questions. Following the presentation, interested parties will be allowed 3 minutes each to address the board. Do we have any, Karen, do we have any cards? We'll now begin with the staff presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Longley and members of the board. My name is Jim Brownell. I'm a geologist in the CV Salts program here in Sacramento office. Last March, I was up here to present to you the requirements and status of the salt and boron control program to the lower San Joaquin River, also known as the salt and boron TMDL. At that time, we indicated we'd be bringing this in the summer a revised management agency agreement with the Bureau of Reclamation, and let's see if I don't have to hunch down a little bit. There we go. And a real-time management program document for your consideration. However, we were unable to meet that schedule, so we're here to provide you an update and revised schedule. I will present the background, the first half of the presentation, and Jeannie Chilcott will present the current status and revised schedule. Also here is Michael Mosley, sitting to my left here, with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. He will be giving a short presentation as well. After that, Michael, Joe McGann of the West Side, representing the West Side Coalition, will be here, as well as myself and Jeannie to answer your questions. I will begin with background information on the salt and boron control program and its current status. Then Jeannie will provide information on the revised draft components of both the management agency agreement and the real-time management program document. We will include comments that we have received from the public, and Jeannie will provide a revised schedule. This slide should help us get oriented. The San Joaquin River, of course, San Joaquin River Valley is in the central part of the south central part of the state, extending approximately from Stockton in the north to Fresno in the south. The San Joaquin River historically flowed out of the Sierra Nevada, flowing west to the bottom of the valley where it turned and flowed north to the delta or at Vernalis. Vernalis is commonly or is defined as the southernmost extent of the delta. In the early 50s, the Bureau of Reclamation under the Central Valley Project built Friant Dam and diverted water from the upper San Joaquin River south into the Tulare Lake Basin. To replace that water, the Bureau of Reclamation pumps water from the delta and via the Delta Mendota Canal transfers it to irrigators and wetlands on the west side of the valley and also ultimately to the Mendota Pool. Currently, or today more or less, we have a system where the lower San Joaquin flows from approximately Mendota Pool to to Vernalis. Although much of the year, the Mendota Pool, the section from about the Mendota Pool to the Merced River is dry, or just contains seepage from groundwater from irrigation return flows. The system now, which is a highly modified system, essentially has return flows entering the river from the west side irrigation and fresh water, which is provided by the three major tributaries on the east side, the Merced, the Tuolumne, and the Stanislaus. Elevated salinity has been a problem since the change in hydrology has occurred. Water rights permits issued for the Central Valley Project in the 50s, 60s, and 70s included salinity control measures. Then, at the end of 1999, the State Board issued Water Right Decision 1641, or D-1641. Provisions of 1641 include salinity standards or water quality objectives for the river at Vernalis. These are agricultural objectives and established to protect agriculture, essentially. They're divided into an irrigation season and a non-irrigation season. During the irrigation season, the standard is 700, or conductivity of 700, protecting beans. And in the winter, the standard is a conductivity of 1,000, designed to protect alfalfa. Of real importance here, I think, is the Vernalis objective. The 1641 assigned Vernalis objective responsibility to the Bureau of Reclamation. And this is also very important. Directs the Central Valley Water Board to evaluate a program to regulate ag discharge timing. So the State Board's direction to staff regarding ag discharge timing is essentially real-time salinity management of the river. This graph is a graph of the salinity at Vernalis during the 1993 water year. You can see the dashed line on the left is the water quality objective for the irrigation season, or excuse me, the non-irrigation season, and the dashed on the left is for the irrigation season. Whenever the graphed line goes above the dashed line, as in April or again in August, the water quality objective at Vernalis would have been exceeded. By contrast, everywhere where there's space between the dashed line and the graphed line, the river had additional capacity to accept more salt, essentially. So the idea of real-time management is to control the release of salinity to times where there's assimilative capacity in the river. In other words, take those peaks there and move them into the valleys. In response to Decision 1641 and to federal TMDL regulations for impaired water bodies, the Central Valley Water Board adopted the regulatory program, or the salt and boron control program for the lower San Joaquin River Basin in September of 2004. The two major goals of the control program are to meet water quality objectives at Vernalis while allowing the river to continue to export salt from the basin. During the development of the control program, the primary sources of salt loading to the river were found to be ag return flows and imported irrigation water from the Delta Mendota Canal. 4 compliance options were provided for discharges of irrigation return flows. 1, cease discharge to surface water. 2, discharge water that does not exceed conductivity of 315. 3, operate under WDRs with salt effluent limits or fixed load limits. And 4, operate under waiver of waste discharge requirements. Waiver, what did I say? Basically, yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. Getting ahead of myself here. Okay, so the control program allocates salt loads to 7 sub-areas within the lower San Joaquin River Basin. It also allocates load to the DMC, the Delta Mendota Canal. These 7 sub-areas in the Delta Mendota Canal each must come into a compliance with the control program under the following prioritized schedule. The Northwest Side and Grassland sub-areas and the Delta Mendota Canal were scheduled to come into compliance last July 28th. However, this past water year was a critical water year, and therefore they were not in compliance. They were in compliance, excuse me. However, it's, I think, important to note that had we not been in a drought, they'd be out of compliance at this point. The remaining sub-areas have later compliance dates. Now I turn your attention to the status of the control program. The vernal objectives have continued to be met since the 1995 water year. Provisions of the control program have been incorporated into the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program General Orders. An important part of those general orders is the compliance option that we will discuss next. The program recognized that strictly meeting monthly load limits that are set in the program are very conservative and result in many months when there is assimilative capacity in the river that could have been used to export salt out of the river. So the program provided compliance options for reclamation and for the non-point source dischargers, or basically the irrigators. An option to the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation is the development of a management agency agreement to address salt imports from the DMC that includes provisions to meet the DMC load allocations in the control program or provide dilution flows to create additional assimilative capacity in excess of its allocations. Option for non-point source discharges is to participate in a board-approved real-time salinity management program. Dischargers are in compliance with the salt and boron control program as long as the salinity objectives at Vernalis are met. Reclamation and Water Board did assign sign a December 2008 MAA. In the MAA, Reclamation agreed to offset at least 25% of excess DMC salt load, implement action plan to address salt and boron, submit reports on water quality and salt loads, seek funding for salinity control efforts, and this is important, initiate stakeholder efforts to develop real-time management. It was decided that the program would be set up in 2 phases due to the fact that stakeholders really weren't certain that real-time management was going to work here. So phase one was the 2008 MAA. And the second phase, the idea was the second phase would be updated based on the results of the evaluation of whether real-time management was viable. Several activities were completed under the 2008 MAA. The Vernalis objectives, salinity objectives continued to be met. Salt fate and loading studies were provided by the Bureau of Reclamation. Pilot studies for real-time monitoring were performed. Of importance, of course, would be the grasslands watershed pilot studies. Reclamation has also has spent quite a bit of time and resources in developing a forecasting tool. And also, they were urged, and they have done an outreach program to stakeholders to encourage them to join this program. Well, of course, the important conclusion of the 2008 MAA was basically it was the opinion of not only the Water Board, but Reclamation and other interested parties. Real-time management of salinity in the lower San Joaquin River was viable. Now I will turn it over to Jeannie Chilcott to present where we are today and the revised schedule.
Before, Ms. Brown, before you go further, when you talk about real-time management, and it's a very important part of this program, I don't know what's going to be covered by the later speakers, but if you could just, in a synopsis, real quick view, explain to the board what real-time management is.
Well, on a real-time basis, the river is monitored at a number of points, and I think Reclamation may show you some of these points that they're proposing. But and based on this real-time information that's coming into a central point, it's determined whether or not additional, presumably held back saline waters can be released to the river. Their forecasting tool would be it does a hindsight and a foresight. I think a foresight's up to 2 weeks ahead. And based on that information, the various stakeholders that discharge to the water, as well as discharge to the river, as well as Reclamation, who has the ability to provide dilution flows, are notified and coordinate their activities to accomplish that. Is that?
Yes, and so this is using assimilative capacity.
Oh, correct. Yes.
And it creates no detrimental environmental issues by so doing, but at the same time, you're able to move salt. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the idea. Basically maximize the amount of salt we can move out of the river without violating the Vernalis objectives.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you.
I'm not that tall. Okay. Good morning, Chair Longley, members of the board. My name's Jean Chilcott. I'm an environmental program manager here in the Rancho Cordova office. I want to point out that when we talked to you in March, we found out that real-time management was a viable alternative for salinity management in the lower San Joaquin River Basin. But there was another thing going on in March. In March, we were looking ahead at a compliance date of July 28th, when we either had to have monthly load allocations of salt going into the river or be operating under an approved real-time management program, a board-approved program. So we told the board, under that incentive, that we would be back to you in the summer with documents that you could consider for approval. Now, we've obviously missed that deadline. But I do want to point out that in an odd way, being a critically dry year has led us not to be out of compliance. So at least we're not out of compliance. And there are a number of things that we did complete since we last talked to you in March, which I'd like to go over now. The most important is that by May, both board staff and reclamation staff had negotiated a revised management agency agreement. Also in May, Reclamation had been working with the stakeholders along the west side of the valley and anyone else who was willing to participate to draft a real-time management framework. We received those, we went over them, we've posted them on our website on June 4th, and they were available for public review and comment. We extended the comment period until August 18th, once we knew we were in a critical year and we wouldn't be out of compliance. And we did receive comments up until the end of August. Now, the revised MAA has a few different components to it. One, it's a 5-year term document, which lines up with what you'll see with the real-time management program. It continues to require an offset of at least 25% of the excess Delta Mendota Canal salt load going into the basin. It supports salt load reduction projects, so actually removing the salt from the basin, and includes the requirement and commitment to actively support any board-approved real-time management program and participate in the overarching CV salts effort. One of the key components that the MAA requires as a commitment is for the reclamation to provide annual work plans. These work plans document the specific activities that reclamation will do in support of the goals of the MAA, or the real-time management program. It was decided to keep this work plan outside of the MAA document itself in order to allow it to be more flexible and be able to be adjusted as we move through the program and as the needs of the program became more clear. The real-time management program framework, the draft proposed framework, has a phased approach. There's 4 phases over a 60-month period, so again, that 5-year time period. Each phase progressively includes water quality monitoring and additional management actions that will lead to a fully functional program, so that we're balancing those saline discharges with assimilative capacity, using the river to export salt, and still making sure that the water quality objectives are met. Also included in that document is a memorandum of understanding between the stakeholders participating, so we know specifically which stakeholders are participating and what are their responsibilities under this program. The real-time management framework also includes the revised MAA and Reclamation's work plan once it's approved by the board. And it was included so that it was very clear the cooperation between all the different agencies and also the commitments of the Bureau to support the program, so everybody knew where they were working during the year. So you can see the annual work plan is an important piece of both documents, the MAA and the real-time management program. So the MAA calls out in general what the components of this work plan must contain. It needs to propose specific activities. It needs to provide a schedule or a timeline for the completion of those activities. It has to identify the funding for each of those activities, what the Bureau's committing or where that funding would come from. And it also needs to start projecting out. So be thinking ahead, what else is needed for this program and where would that funding come from? Oops, sorry. Unfortunately, we've run into some extensive delays on receiving a work plan that we could provide for public review and comment. This gives us some key schedules. The original date that we thought we would be receiving this document was mid-April. Now, we did receive the revised management agency agreement in mid-April, but the work plan was not attached. In mid-June, we received a summarized report of all the activities that Reclamation had completed to date, which was extensive, and we received a detailed outline for a work plan. Staff immediately began working with Reclamation staff and making sure all the components that were needed and specified in the MAA would be included in a final document. And by mid-July, we had provided our last set of editorial comments. In August, by August 1st, we were informed that the work plan and the comments, the revised version, were in management review at Reclamation. Now, something I want to point out here that I think is pretty important is this is the first work plan for the first year of the MAA. That's this federal fiscal year. So we're talking about a work plan that was for federal fiscal year 2014-2015 and whose work actually began on October 1st. So we don't have that document. The work's continuing. There is work going on, and I'm sure Mike will let us know what that is, but we don't have the documentation specified in the MAA.
Sorry,
Can I jump in? Do you think that you anticipate that that's because it's the first year, or do you anticipate that this is going to happen on an ongoing basis, or why do you
I
think?
will get to that in some of the changes that we put in the language of the MAA, but it is obviously a significant concern, considering we're in the fiscal year that we're waiting for a work plan for. But we did have the revised MAA and the real-time management program framework, and they had been posted since June, and we did receive comments. We received comments on behalf of the San Joaquin Tributaries Authority and also on behalf of Stockton East Water District. I believe you have those letters in your packet, and you'll see some of them are fairly extensive. Quite a few of those comments are editorial, just cleaning up language, but there are some other substantive comments that can be grouped in general into these 4 areas. The first is the fact that there has to be recognition that reclamation is continuing to be responsible to ensure that the Vernalis salinity objectives are met. The second is the need to reduce reliance on New Maloney's reservoir dilution flows as a sole component to meet those objectives. There was concern expressed that the Memorandum of Understanding between the participants, the wording in that document might actually exclude or restrict any new participants from joining who are not already signed up. And finally, there was the need expressed that the public had an opportunity to review this work plan document describing all the activities prior to it going into effect. In our response to the comments, we began negotiating with reclamation staff and the stakeholders. And the first 2 sets concerning the responsibility of reclamation and New Maloney's, we essentially addressed by going back to that State Water Rights Decision 1641, which clearly identified reclamation's responsibility for meeting the Vernalis salinity objectives. And it also clearly stated that there's a wide latitude of activities that reclamation could take to meet those objectives. It could include providing mitigation and dilution flows from its own projects, purchasing water from other projects, or investing in salinity reduction activities. So we excluded any language that might make it appear that we were strictly focused on dilution of New Maloney's to meet the objectives, but kept the responsibility and that it was the Bureau's responsibility to ensure that those objectives are met during the course of development of this real-time management program. The comment about the Memorandum of Understanding between the real-time management program participants is a little bit more tricky. This is a document that's actually between the stakeholders and how they are going to be ensuring that this program moves forward. We, as an agency, are not a signatory on this document, so we cannot make adjustments to it, but we have spoken with Joe, who was a critical person who was working on this, and he and other stakeholders who are participants have assured us it wasn't the intent to exclude anyone. In fact, they want everyone in the basin to be actively engaged in this process to make it a success. But I'll leave it up to Joe to explain what they're doing on this particular item, and we can discuss it with him at the end of the presentation. The final major response had to do with the submittal and public review of the annual work plans before they were in place. And so what we did in this revised negotiated MAA is we've suggested language that says, in general, work plans must be available 90 days prior to when the work is to start. So at least 90 days before the beginning of the federal fiscal year, which is October 1st. There has to be a public review and comment period. And it also requires board approval of those work plans prior to the beginning of work. And it gives the board executive officer's approval, and it gives the board executive officer the ability to terminate the management agency agreement if an acceptable work plan is not received on time. For this first year work plan, because of all the delays that we've experienced getting this document, we included specific timelines that require the posting of a revised version for public comment by the end of this month and submittal of a final version to our executive officer for approval by December 31st.
Jeannie, what happens if the EO decides the work plan is not acceptable?
That was in my last slide, but
Okay.
I'll tell you now. If the EO does not approve the work plan, if we do terminate the management agency agreement, staff will go back and complete some draft waste discharge requirements that have specific monthly load allocations for reclamation that we had set aside as we started moving forward on developing this process.
Do they become, is there a compliance issue? Is somebody instantly out of compliance? Or no?
The Bureau I might even have to refer to Patrick on this one, but the Bureau would be out of compliance because they were considered, their alternative to operating under waste discharge requirements or load allocations was to be in an MAA. But the reality is we need to have the waste discharge requirement in place before we could really do anything about them being out of compliance. Did I get that roughly correct?
Roughly. I mean, what you're dealing with here, and it's not something that lends itself to an easy solution, as would be the case if you had a private entity discharging waste. You have with the MAA, you've essentially combined some of the water quality aspects with some of the water rights aspects that affect water quality in D1641. So essentially you have a real complex system. If push comes to shove, it might be this is the type of situation where it may involve very complex litigation if we really have to turn the screws on reclamation. What you see in front of you is the reclamation has what has been deemed, even by reclamation's recognition, an unsustainable means of complying with the Vernalis water quality objectives by adding flows from New Melones. When you impound the water at New Melones, that's subject to a water rights adjudicated by the State Water Board. They put conditions on that, and so essentially there's a few ways to get at it. It's not quite a discharge of waste, but you can either enforce the conditions of D1641, you can ask the State Board to revise those conditions, or you can enter into a kind of cooperative agreement with reclamation, which is the avenue that we're going through right now, or you kind of enter into a even more complex regulatory scheme where you regulate all of the individual discharges into reclamation's system, perhaps prohibiting a lot of those discharges, which could bring a lot of the agriculture in that area to a screeching halt. So, you have kind of three unpalatable actions, and then one which is the MAA action, which could work for everybody, but we don't have a lot of good hammers if folks don't abide by that.
John, before we go too far into this, I'd like Jeannie to finish your presentation, and Michael Mosley here representing the Bureau, and I think that Michael, if I'm not mistaken, has a presentation, and I think that's the time when we really can get more in depth in this. Thank you.
Okay. I think that was my last point. Okay, so we have a revised schedule based on all the activities to date. We have received the revised real-time management framework that's been provided, so we have that in hand, but again, it's missing those attachments of a management agency agreement and a work plan. Now, to meet a schedule to come back for consideration of the board for approval of the MAA, the work plan, the real-time management program, well, not the work plan, we need reclamation to release the work plan for public review by the end of October. We also need reclamation's legal team or management to complete the review on the adjustments and the edits that were made to the last revised proposed MAA document that were made based on comments and submitted to them in early September. All of the documentation needs to be provided to us so that we can include it in the agenda packet for public release in mid-November. Okay. Now, staff is committed to meet this December board meeting and bring those items to you. But again, it's really dependent on whether or not we receive this documentation from the Bureau of Reclamation. I also need to point out that the packet that you would receive in December would have the draft work plan. It wouldn't be a final approved work plan. Now, the executive officer has the authority to approve it and also to not approve it, thus terminating the MAA, which we were just discussing, and leading staff back into evaluating other alternatives for compliance, including development of waste discharge requirements and permitting, and allocating those monthly load allocations. So we really would like to hear from the board on this. You know, if the board would prefer to have the complete documentation together, we would need to postpone our meeting and consideration of this item until the February board meeting, first part of February. Now, staff's willing to make adjustments in the schedule. It's really the board's preference and your direction. But at this point, I would like to encourage you to listen to Mike Mosley's presentation and have a discussion with him as well before a final decision. You look like you have a question, Carl.
No, I don't. Well, I have a question. Are you,
I'm almost done.
okay.
So I was just going to say, I'm about to transfer it over to Mike Mosley, and then we could answer questions now, or we could all be available to answer questions at the end of his presentation.
Certainly. Good. We'll wait then till Michael's made his presentation. And Michael, looks like you're up.
Okay, I am having technical difficulties. Ah, how about that?
Morning, Dr. Longley, board members. I'm going to make this presentation quick. I have about 9 slides, but I think probably it would be better served if I could answer some of your questions. So let's go through what I have pretty quickly. Stop me. You know, it can be collaborative, and we'll try to make some progress today. So as I've stated, my name is Michael Mosley. I am the Regional Water Quality Coordinator for the Mid-Pacific region of the Bureau of Reclamation. Let me look around. Make sure nobody else has made it in here to visit me that I should introduce. Let's get started. I'll give you a quick outline. We are under a management agency agreement, as you know, signed in 2008. And so I want to quickly talk about what's happened from our perspective. Then I want to talk to you about real-time management, some of the more technical things, some of the detail that we've attained, and some of the tools that we have that we've developed that can be used within the basin. And then let's talk about the updated management agency agreement.
So Michael, don't step back away from the mic. I know you have a tendency to do that because we can't pick you up on the recording.
I'm sorry.
That is not the best microphone in the world.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I have I'll raise it up a little bit and try to speak into it.
Thank you.
My goal is for us to discuss and make some progress, so bear with me. Okay, so here are some of the highlights from the current MAA. We've developed a lot of extensive knowledge in applying real-time management. We did that near the San Luis unit in the Grassland Water District. So lots of monitoring stations were installed, and we also utilized some software to visualize what concentrations they have in their system and what they're sending out of their system. First step in real-time management, what is my salt load? What am I sending to the river so that I can manage it? We've also made some major improvements to a model called WARMF, Watershed Analysis Risk Management Framework, a model that we use to forecast. It's a watershed model, and it can be run in simulation mode. We take a week's data from the past and forecast 2 weeks in the future to try and give basin stakeholders some information that they need so that they can manage their loads. And we've been working to improve that model to make it so that normal people can use it, first of all, and use it and understand it, and also giving some tools to help plan. And so we're continuing that improvement as we speak, with our goal being to get that information up on the internet.
Michael, as I understand WARF, it has a flow component, but it's a water quality model. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe so.
And so it
Yeah.
gives you prediction of salt concentrations. In other words, salt transport. Is that
It does.
correct?
It can, and I can talk about that. I have
Okay,
another
thank you.
slide.
So, Michael, another question, sorry. You said the goal is to let users be able to figure out and manage their load.
Yes.
I don't know what that means. I don't know what the practical implication of that is.
Okay, so strangely enough, a lot of the basin stakeholders have done lots of things to improve their systems. And some of it is for water conservation, some of it is for efficiency, some of it is just for various reasons. And it really comes to a head in a critical water year like this. A lot of times the discharge off agricultural fields can be reused. It could be reused to water fields. And so, you know, some of that infrastructure exists, but there's an additional benefit to it in that a lot of that infrastructure can be used to control discharges into the river or to minimize those discharges into the river. And so if the stakeholders in the basin know that that's something that needs to be done, they can take actions using some infrastructure that they already have, you know, to that effect. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay, you can read down the rest of the slide. The bottom is probably the most important, the last bullet there. You know, we've kind of sat by and created an atmosphere of cooperation in the basin. So we have people who have seen and used our tools. We have a list of folks who want to review and utilize some of the technical tools that we're creating, and everyone is moving forward more or less on the same page, which can be a very difficult thing to attain, especially dealing with water quality. Okay, so for the real-time management program, just very quickly, we have the forecast model that we run weekly now, and we also speak about the data that we obtain from that model in stakeholder meetings, just so folks can get used to seeing the data. You know, if we say that it's forecast to be at 600 microsiemens per centimeter in the next 2 weeks, okay, what do I do with that? What does that mean to me as a stakeholder in the basin? Is it just idle knowledge? Should I pay attention? Should I do something? We're developing that now by disseminating that information. And also, we've done some work in Grassland Water District, but we've also done some more work to visualize the San Joaquin River itself. Now, you can go to sites like CDEC, California Data Exchange Center, and you can gather information from individual stations, but you can't see it all on one screen. And you can't get an idea of what loads or what flows or what other water quality concerns might be throughout the entire basin. And so we've done some work to visualize that. Here's an example. It's a busy slide, a slide I originally did not like or did not want to show, but you've seen it before. This is actually a visualization. If you look at the bottom left of the map there, you'll see blue. That blue is the San Luis Reservoir. Then you kind of move over east or right from there, and the city of Los Banos is a little grayed out area. So what you're looking at is kind of that middle western portion of the basin. And so each yellow box you see is a station, and that station is reporting an electrical conductivity, a flowing stage, and a salt load that's calculated. This program is called ArcGIS. Each segment you see that's colored there is actually river segments in that area. And for this, the color ramp can mean what you want it to mean because it's a very powerful program for displaying information. In this case, it's just giving you an idea of the electrical conductivity of each of the segments. Greens and blues being lower, yellows and reds being higher. So here you could look as you drink your morning coffee, if you're in the basin, you're a water master, you're someone else at a water district, and you can get an idea every day from this visualization what's going on in your system. Do I need to do something? Do I have areas that are bad? Do I have areas that are good? You know, do I have some capacity? And so that's the power of the visualization tool that we're trying to work to make more user-friendly throughout the basin. Now to the model. We've contracted with Systec Incorporated to make the WRF model a little bit more user-friendly, and in doing so, we created this manager module, and you're seeing just a slide from it. So what you're looking at is, I believe, data from a couple years ago, and it's presented for total dissolved solids, and it's along the San Joaquin River. So you have a red dashed line at the top. That red dashed line represents calculated assimilative capacity, and then you see each colored line, bar, whatever you would like to call it, stacked going down. Those are all inputs into the San Joaquin River, the two biggest being mud and salt slough. So with this tool, you could actually see or get an idea of where the loads are coming from, what discharge points, and use that information to see which areas at any particular time, which areas aren't, which areas are, where do we have assimilative capacity, where don't we. And we have other tools that can actually show you a different view that shows you along the San Joaquin River each major known monitoring station or point, Crow's Landing. I blank on names along the San Juan King River today. Anyway, each point as you go towards the Vernalis area, where loads are coming from. So we can give you an idea with some accuracy of where loads are coming from, where they're targeted, so they can be managed.
So Michael, could you go back to that slide?
Sure.
So for real-time management, where there's that void between where the bars are and the red line,
Yes.
that's where we would be able to have a similar capacity, so more load could be discharged then. But as you move down towards your right of the screen, you wouldn't have it, so we wouldn't allow the discharges then. Is that,
Yes.
I'm
Thank you.
reading it right? So that's what they mean by real time.
Our contracting worked. Folks can understand what we display. That was the goal of it. Okay. So the model's just a tool, and the forecasting process that we had to develop is displayed here. So we use the model. We update the model with information that we get from talking to basin stakeholders. Hey, what do you plan to release? When do you plan to release it in this time period? Are you diverting anything? How much are you diverting? That actually can remove salt load from the river. And then we disseminate that information and discuss it right now, starting off with some of the CV salts, or just talking directly with basin stakeholders. And after that, if something needs to happen, we can do that. And this is kind of the process that we've developed. It's not just the model, but it's that communication and collaboration that we've been working so hard to develop. That'll make the whole program work. I mean, as you all know, this is the most beneficial way of managing salt. And if everybody's participating, it'll work to everyone's benefit. And I think we're headed in that direction. So with that, let's talk about the management agency agreement. We've received comments, and those comments have led to some significant changes from the prior MAA. When we say significant, you know, if the MAA stayed about the same as the last one, it really wouldn't require that much review. But because there's been significant changes, we're required to give all of our managers a chance to review and add their comments. And that actually works to everyone's benefit here, because everyone will be on the same page, and we can all, as reclamation and as stakeholders, all agree and move forward without worrying about anything hanging us up while we're in the process. So yes, we're reviewing. I put that last bullet there just so you all know that, you know, reclamation is seeking to accommodate as many comments as we can. We're seeking to accommodate all reasonable comments so that everyone can feel happy about the program and the process and the progress that we're making in this program. And I think that actually serves the MAA and salt management and all of the basin stakeholders in the best way. And that's what reclamation is seeking to do. I know we can be a slow organization, especially with new documents that have never been created before, and that we're trying to figure out how to make sure all of our T's are crossed and I's are dotted. Do we need to do NEPA? Do we have to go through this sort of public review? Do we have to go through that? Just so that we don't get hung up, you know, after we're starting to make progress and have approved things. So, in summary, we will submit the MA and RTMP documents as soon as possible. I don't think we'll have any problems with the schedule that Ms. Chilcott laid out for you. But our goal is to accommodate.
Let me interrupt you, Michael. So you're saying that the October 31st date for posting for public review is feasible, and the final to the executive officer for approval by December 31st. Those dates are, from what I just heard, are something you think you can meet. Is that correct?
Yes. So we plan to release the work plan by October 31st for public comment and review. Depending on the comments that we receive, we'll try to return the document as quickly as possible so that we can meet that December 31st time deadline. And it's our goal for this program to be approved by the board in December. That's what we're shooting for.
Appreciate that. And I'd certainly like an update at the next board meeting, which is first week of December, on if we're going to meet that December date.
Most certainly.
Thank you.
Okay, with all of that being said, with all the contentious things, you know, Reclamation is committed to this program. We do have funding laid on and funding planned for the future. And so we will stick and commit ourselves to salt management in the San Joaquin Basin. We will continue to run the forecast model. We'll continue to participate and disseminate that information. So nothing's going to stop. With that being said, I'll take your questions.
Thank you. And I point out that Board Member Schneider joined us, and Bob, you want to talk?
I have a question.
Yes.
On the modeling that you've done, which is excellent, and Pamela stole my thunder a little bit, there is that void which represents increased capacity to discharge salt from the basin. So the question
Yes.
that comes to mind is if you have a wet year or a dry year model for a year, what additional assimilable capacity can reasonably be expected? What percentage of salt buildup is that in the San Joaquin Valley? How much of our problem are we addressing with this real-time approach? Does this work on a year-to-year basis, or does it, are we still accumulating salt, or are we actually able to discharge some of the accumulation that's occurred in the past?
Good questions. The tools we're developing can help us find those answers. I'm confident with that. I guess the good and bad thing about a critical year is it forces you to operate at your tolerances. The model would be more accurate, easier to use and predict in normal years or closer to normal water years. But because it's critical, we really have to do a lot of due diligence to make sure the information that we give is good information. But I do think it's actually model skill, we call it, assessing. We're doing that using past data. How does the model perform versus data that we've measured in the past? Very easy to get an idea of where we would have been and what we could have exported through that process. And as much as the past can predict the future, use that as a tool. So we most certainly can do that.
I'd like to add to that a little bit. The Central Valley Salinity Alternatives for Long-Term Sustainability, the CV Salts effort, they're working right now on the S-Salts project, which is the review of implementation alternatives. And they're specifically looking at the real-time management program in the lower San Joaquin River Basin and asking that exact question. On various water year types, how much of the accumulated salt load and the imported salt load can be exported using this system, and is it enough? Is it adequate for what we're continuing to put in the system and still have sustainability?
Yeah, in any case, this is certainly the biggest bang for the buck, and I really strongly support the work that's been done by the Bureau and our staff and the stakeholders in this process. I mean, I think this with modern technology, we can accomplish this, and we wouldn't have been able to in the past. So I really applaud your work, and I didn't mean to just be piling on with asking repetitive questions, evidently, but I think that is a key question. And it's just I think a benchmark of success is people have been working on this problem a lot for a long time, and invested a lot of dollars. And I think if we can see this as a fair percentage of accomplishing what we need to accomplish, or even a small percentage, I mean, I think knowing that we've made progress and being able to talk about that, I think is pretty wonderful. So thanks for all your work, everybody.
I think I heard Michael talk in the early part of his presentation about a team coming together that can work and has gained confidence in each other. And from what I've been seeing, and certainly through the CV Salts effort, that's certainly true. And Bureau's Bureau's contribution to that is obviously extremely important. So, any further questions?
Yeah, I got.
Go ahead, John.
I have a couple. So I'm not sure who to ask this question of, but why does a single critical year allow for a 4-year compliance schedule shift? I'm not sure I understand that.
The single critical year, when this control program was put together, it's new. And the thought was, well, when you have less dilution flows, it's going to be that much more difficult to control the salt loads. And they weren't sure exactly how difficult, and they weren't sure exactly when that first critically dry year would occur. It doesn't automatically just give a 4-year extension. If next year is a normal year, if next year is a wet year, those compliance numbers are in place. The compliance schedule will never extend past 2018. So if you had another critical year in 2019, 2020, it doesn't make any difference. It's just to allow people a little additional time to figure out what to do when you don't have those dilution flows and your system's changed dramatically.
Weather's hard to forecast, I know, but forecasters are now saying this next year may be a critical year. So want to see what you have to say about that if it does occur. I hope you come back with good news next year, though, insofar as the weather's concerned.
So, yeah, I hope we get some water too.
Yeah.
The next question I had is Jim mentioned the integration with the ILRP, and it sounds like, well, what Mike was saying, that the practical implications are sort of a daily or a weekly adjustment that folks could make, but the ILRP is a much broader, longer-term program. I'm just trying to marry the two up.
One of the things that, as you saw in the compliance deadline, it said you are either operating under waste load allocations within a waste discharge requirement, a general order, or you are a participant in a real-time management program, a board-approved program. Because we were not sure which was coming first, we wanted to make sure that those load allocations and the conditions within the control program were captured in the general orders for agriculture in all the basins within the valley. So the west side, the east side, the grasslands. Those implementation options of either controlling their monthly load allocations of salt or participating in a board-approved program are included in the permits. So we're covered on both sides.
And more generally, it's been stated time and again, then insofar as ILRP is concerned, the salt part of that from CV Salts is integrated into the ILRP effort. So you would expect those kinds of things to be in the general order.
Yes.
And then I know you asked for feedback on December or February, and I'll get to that in a second. But there's sort of the plumbing question. You talked about exporting salts through the river, right? Did I get that right?
Well, using the river to move salt out of the basin, yes.
And where does it go when you export it?
It goes into the delta and then out through the bay. And so the concept is at Vernalis, you have the water quality objectives that have been set to protect agriculture. That's the most sensitive use to salt in the delta. So we're exporting salt out of the basin, but we're continuing to meet those objectives. So we're not causing an impairment in the system. Right now, what we're seeing is there's actually more assimilative capacity. We could be moving more salt through the system than we're actually moving right now. And because we're not moving that salt out of the basin, we're having accumulation within the basin and continuing problems with loss of land use and degrading groundwater and other issues. So we're looking at our various options to ensure that we're protecting beneficial uses, but if we have a conduit that can move that salt out of the basin, we use it to its maximum capacity.
Okay, thank you. And then this work plan is the first work plan?
Yes.
So the question was do we want to see a draft work plan or a final work plan?
Right. The question was, do you want a complete final packet to review? And if so, we would need to wait until February. But if you're comfortable with the fact that we are conducting work, we just don't have it documented yet, and giving the board's executive officer the authority to approve or disapprove of the final work plan, then we can bring the management agency agreement and the real-time management program framework to you for approval at that time.
So if we go with the earlier date, we will have a draft plan.
Right.
And thank you for bringing that up, John, because we really need to discuss that as board members.
Right.
And what's your take on that?
My question is, my worry, I guess, is a different way to say it, is that when you have the first draft of anything that's new, the final may not. And so the question is, Jeannie, do you think there's enough robustness there that the first draft plan will? Maybe you haven't even seen it yet. So, Michael, I don't know. I'm not sure who to ask, but if this first plan comes out and that's what we decide to go with, but yet it's either deficient or could be added to, or people have lots of different views about it, then we're not really seeing the final product. I mean, there might be a big change between draft and final, I guess is my worry. And
I could actually speak. So that draft that you would see in December, it's our goal to incorporate as many comments as possible. So you would be seeing a draft that is reflecting comments from around the basin. we would actually like to have final documents for you as well, but in the interest of just moving things along, it seemed like, a good option. But yeah, we wouldn't give you the current plan that we have now. We would send to you as draft one that reflects comments from the basin.
So if I can speak to that, the rough draft, or however they want it, the framework or whatever they call it, they sent to us was pretty deficient, and they're aware of that, the Bureau is. And they're working on that. I guess to expedite and getting the MAA in place, we've done this before where you've allowed that to come under my authority. We would have a draft by then. If significant changes or if we got significant comments, we would then put it on the agenda and bring it back to the board. Otherwise, if there's very minor changes, I would just go ahead and sign it, but as the board approved me to do so.
Right.
But
Our backstop is the executive officer, and as she points out, this has been practiced in the past. I quite frankly would like to see it in December, and hopefully we'll be close enough that we're a go, but if we're not, we're not. But I think I personally like to see it in December. And if it comes back in February, it comes back in February. So, and any other thoughts on that?
Sounds like there's a good relationship between the two entities, and so I appreciate that. What assurances, I guess I'm looking at the Bureau for this, what assurances can we have that this is, it sounds like it's a high priority and a first priority for the Bureau, but, the missed deadline was missed by a lot. And so, going forward, do you anticipate that the deadlines are going to be manageable and reachable? I know you've expressed your belief in the Bureau's ability to comply with this deadline that's pointed in the presentation today. What about as on an ongoing basis?
Thank you for the question. We spent a fair amount of time, that's what's caused the delay, figuring out what the administrative burden is going to be for us as an organization. Do we have the staff? We don't want to set ourselves up for failure. And so that's kind of what's taking some extra time. When do we have to do what? How much actual time do we have to do our work? And can we make it all work? Can we accommodate everyone? And that's kind of really the largest reason why there's been such a lengthy delay. But I think we have a handle on it. At least we think we have a handle on it. And we can meet some of these deadlines, the October 31st, and get you at least a draft that you can review. I'd like to do that personally because I'd like to know what you think. So we'll try to make that schedule.
Well, I appreciate your representation. Thank you.
Bob, do you have comments? Very good. Well, it looks like we'd like to see it in December. And if you have any other questions, did we answer your question, Jeannie? Good. Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Michael, for your comments and your real important input. Joe McGann.
Thank you. Quickly, I'm Joe McGann. I represent two entities. One, the San Joaquin Valley Drainage Authority, which is the parent organization of the West Side San Joaquin River Watershed Coalition. So if you will, the irrigated lands program on the west side of the San Joaquin River in this area. I also represent the Grassland Basin Drainers, which are the other part of the west side area. These two entities basically are comprise the northwest side and the grassland area that on the schedule for the implementation of the TMDL, they're first on the hook, if you will. They're the ones that had the July 2014 deadline, yet because it's a critical year, it could be extended. And so, quite frankly, we stepped up to the plate because we're first on the list. These two organizations got together and developed this MOU where our two organizations can sign on and document that we're signed on to the real-time program. It also allows for other entities to join either as they wish to or as their deadlines approach, albeit the next deadline is 4 years from the first one. These two entities actually developed the MOU, have approved it, and have signed it. There were some requested changes in it. The change was to have the original document said to have someone else join. It required a unanimous approval of the current members. We changed that to a majority approval, or we'll change it to a majority approval, which was kind of one of the comments. Make it easier for folks to join, but it's certainly our intent, our desire is to have as many people join as possible. And not only does it have those other areas like on the east side of the San Joaquin River that are obligated to join, albeit at a later deadline. It allows for agencies to join, cooperating agencies like the Bureau of Reclamation, like Department of Water Resources, et cetera. So we're certainly committed to our part in the program, and and I also represent, part of the West Side Coalition is the wetland areas, Grassland Water District, and those areas. So that's why we're participants. We're certainly ongoing and look forward to implementing the program. And of course, the Irrigated Lands Program, written into our general order is the requirement to comply with this TMDL. So that's another reason we're doing that, and I have a feeling that'll be in the new grassland order also.
Thank you, Joe. Are any questions? Thank you very much. I have a card from David Corey, representing the San Joaquin River Exchange Contractors.
David Corey, representing the San Joaquin River Exchange Contractors, and I guess CV Salts. I couldn't sit here while you guys talked about salts for this much and not actually inject something in it. The real-time program, it's going to be an important component of salinity management in the Central Valley, to be able to export as much salt as we can while still protecting beneficial uses in the river and the delta. It's not going to be the silver bullet that deals with a salt balance in the valley, I don't think. There's a broader issue here of how we maintain, and I think Member Schneider pointed this out and asked the relevant question, how are we going to maintain this salt balance? And Jeannie talked about CV salts and S salts and how this all fits together. I think the real-time program will be a component of that. Currently, we're really addressing the Vernalis TMDL. It'll probably be easily adapted into the upstream objectives, whatever they are in terms of the San Joaquin River. But we're going to need to come up with a comprehensive program that deals with salts in the Central Valley. And it's going to be a much bigger issue and challenge than this real-time component of that problem can address. So, we'll look at that, and I invite all the board members to try and engage as much as you can in CV salts. We're really getting to some of the crux of those issues in S salts, trying to look at how are we going to maintain this salt balance, what are our options, do we just hold it in the soil, salt up our ground, and lose that productivity of ag ground and degrade our interior areas? How do we export this salt? And it's a huge challenge that we're grappling with in CV salts, and it's going to take a lot of time and attention on all of your parts to understand the complexity of it and make some of the difficult decisions that are going to come up here in the next couple of years. So I'm glad you're asking the right questions. We don't have all the answers yet, but we're making progress. So thank you.
Any questions for David? David, I want to thank you for your long-term service on CV salts. It's been tremendous. Thank you. With that, we'll conclude this item, and we will take a break for lunch. It is now about 12:22, so we'll be back in here, or we'll try to be back in here at 1:20 or as close to that time as possible, and we'll continue with our agenda.
Dr. Longley, just clarification. I think most of the closed session items are scheduled for Friday tomorrow, except perhaps for one but I think they're all scheduled for tomorrow. That's my understanding.
Oh yes, we do have another closed session item to take up having to do with personnel management.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Pardon? We might.
Yeah, the board will be meeting in closed session to discuss personnel matters pursuant to Government Code Section 1126A.